Chapter 523. Roland could not help but feel a little surprised. Although these theories were common sense in the future, it was not easy for an astrologer who lacked the means of observation to figure out the orbit of the stars. The same goes for the star of extinction. Dispersion's star continued. It said that the cycle of its appearance is as long as 400 to 500 years. That is to say, its orbit is very wide, and it takes such a long time for it to approach us. However, the sun and the moon are right beside us, and it only takes 1 day and 1 night to finish the journey. He took a breath. As we all know, the farther away something is from us, the smaller it looks. It should be the same in the starry sky. Therefore, when the star of extinction approaches us, it will change from a dark star to a bright one, and finally to a crescent moon. Have you found it? Dispersion's star shook his head. The mission handed down hundreds of years ago didn't specify the time of its arrival. Therefore, the star of extinction is probably still in a corner of the starry sky, too far away for us to observe. For the past several decades, you've been doing this kind of thing? Yes, Your Majesty, the old man said tiredly. I became an apprentice of the Astrology Association 40 years ago, and I've never stopped looking up to the sky. Before I became the Chief Astrology Association, I didn't know why I had to stare at a starry sky that hasn't changed for decades. In addition to identifying stars and recording seasons, astrologers will also predict good or bad luck on festivals or happy days. However, it's just following the will of the king, not really predicting the future. All of this must be kept a secret. Only by maintaining the reputation of the sage of astrology can we attract more apprentices. Do you regret it? Dispersion's star shook his head. If it were 10 years ago, I might have regretted it. However, since I became the chief and took over the responsibility from astrologer Falling Star, I've understood what I've been looking up to. This will be a real astrology, an unparalleled prophecy, and also the meaning of the Astrology Association's existence. It's a pity that I don't have much time left to look up to it. Dispersion's star was right. His hair was all white, his face was wrinkled like a mountain, and his forehead was covered with brown spots. Roland thought that his life would come to an end in 2 or 3 years. If it really is a world-ending disaster, didn't our ancestors pass down any strategies to defend against or avoid it? That's a problem for you to consider, Your Majesty. The scholar squeezed out a smile. The astrological platform is only your eyes. It's the king's responsibility to lead the people to survive the disaster. That's why you can't turn it off. Even if the earth shatters and the sky rains fire, as long as you can predict it in advance, the chances of survival will increase. Roland couldn't help but be in awe. He looked up day after day just to verify this prophecy. Even in front of the bloody moon, which symbolized the end of the world, he still abided by his duty. Not everyone could have this kind of dedication. What would happen to the heirs of the royal family if they knew that the apocalypse was coming? Indulge myself, throw away all restraints, and seize the time to enjoy the rest of my life? This was probably the reason why the ancestors had set the time to be announced after the age of 30. After a long silence, he asked the last question. There are also astrological associations in other kingdoms. What is their purpose? Is it also to find this star of extinction? Oh no. I've never left King City, and they haven't sent anyone to Grey Castle. I see. That's all for today. You don't want to turn off the astrological platform? I'll leave it for now. Roland stood up and walked out of the hall. When he was about to leave the room, he turned around and looked at the chief astrologer, who was bowing to see him off. When I have time in the future, I'll give you some better stargazing tools and real astrological knowledge. What? The chief astrologer showed a puzzled expression. Roland didn't explain and continued. In addition, even if the bloody moon is coming, it's not the end of the world. He paused for a moment and said in a resolute tone, "We will survive." The hydrogen balloon was quickly filled. They boarded the basket and flew to the palace. What did you talk about? Lightning asked from outside the basket. I want to know too, Coo. A half-finished story. Nightingale shrugged. In that case, how could I stick to my original plan? Roland rolled his eyes and told her what had happened in the hall. I wanted to pack them up and send them to the Western region, but they had been watching for decades, so I let them finish their last journey in the astrological platform. You're really a benevolent king. Vendi smiled. Goodman. Maggie flapped her wings, raised her head and howled. Ahem, Roland quickly changed the topic. The star of extinction they're waiting for should be the same thing Agatha mentioned. The appearance of the bloody moon and the arrival of the end of the world. This prophecy is probably related to witches. I think so too. Sylvie pondered. The simplest evidence is that this used to be a barbarian land. There wasn't even a city, and people were still living in villages. How could they possibly pursue these illusory things? It should be the survivors of the Union who brought the news of the bloody moon. While rebuilding their homes, they handed over the task of monitoring the sky to the earliest astrologers. And one of them is His Majesty's ancestor? Lightning said excitedly. Oh, this is really a wonderful adventure. Adventure? Where is the danger, Ku? Idiot, it's not necessary to encounter danger. As long as you can understand those secrets that have been covered for a long time, it's the best harvest for an explorer. Ku? But you said before that an explorer shouldn't pay too much attention to the result, but should focus on enjoying the process of the adventure. Maggie blinked innocently. So a great explorer can distinguish when and what kind of situation they should apply to, so any adventure is full of enjoyment. Lightning shouted. You're still far from this realm. Ku! The pigeon landed on Roland's head in frustration. Is that so? The witches couldn't help but laugh. Back at the palace, Roland found the ancient book that recorded the history of the Wimbledon family from the library. After looking through it, he could not help but frown. What's wrong? Nightingale asked. There's no record of astrologers in the family history. He pointed to the yellowed and faded pages. The first ancestor is Maud Wimbledon, and the first king is Tarak Wimbledon. Whether it's the construction of the astrological tower or the higher status of the ruler, there's no mention of them. Someone erased this part from history. Who would do that? She asked in surprise. The person who wrote this book is the successor of the previous generations, right? Yes, a new book will be added after a new one is written, so it shouldn't be left out, Roland said slowly. According to the conditions of the city's construction at that time, and being able to engrave instructions on the golden sheets, there should be a record of this person. Chapter 524. What did you say? Kar Kant, the lord of the city of Evernight and duke of the northern region, stood up in disbelief and stared at the messenger in front of him. The cup on the table fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Your Excellency, I saw it with my own eyes. The messenger lowered his head even more. It took the rebel king only one day to break through the city wall of the king's city. His Majesty couldn't escape either. I'm afraid he's dead now. How? How could it be? Kar murmured. That's the king's city. With the 15-meter-high bluestone city wall, thousands of guards, catapults, and snow powder, it was impossible to break through the defense line without 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers. Even if Prince Roland could gather so many soldiers, he shouldn't have been able to take down the king's city in one day. Their firearms are too powerful. The messenger's voice trembled slightly. It was not clear whether it was because of the exhaustion caused by the overnight journey or because he was shocked by what he had seen. Not only can they fire continuously, but they're also very powerful. Even the king's mad guards can't stop them, let alone the knight. If they get hit by one, they'll be half dead, if not dead. In comparison, His Majesty's firearms are no different from fire sticks. Kar's mind went blank. There was only one thought in his mind: it's over. It's all over. More than a week ago, he had received the new king's order to send a troop to support the king's city. As the newly appointed Duke of the Northern Region, he naturally had to respond. After some discussion, Kar finally selected a troop of 2,500 soldiers from Horsehead Hawes, Snowfox Lista, and his own family to set off after the snow melted. Although there was a gap of more than half a month between the estimated time of arrival and the request for reinforcements, it was not too late, considering that sieges often lasted for several months. Since the spring plowing was about to begin, there were not many serfs in the troop and only a few night soldiers. Most of them were mercenaries and freedmen. However, as long as the troop was sent out, it would be considered a crime of rebellion in the eyes of the rebel king. His good days would soon come to an end. Oh, and Edith. Carr suddenly thought of his precious daughter. If it was her, she might be able to think of a way to save them. Quick, go and fetch the eldest daughter to my room, he shouted to the guard at his side. Soon Edith, dressed in casual clothes, walked into the study. The saber she used for training was still hanging on her side. Her hair was coiled up on top of her head, and the tip of her nose was dripping with sweat. It was obvious that she was practicing her swordsmanship as usual. There was a hint of displeasure on her face. Didn't I say it before? Don't disturb me when I'm practicing. It's different this time. The family is going to be in big trouble. Carr eagerly repeated the message brought by the messenger. What should we do now? He looked at his daughter eagerly, hoping that she could give him a solution. If the North was rich in pearls, then Edith Kant was the brightest one. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also extremely talented. Whether it was in politics or in war, she made other men pale in comparison. It could be said that Edith had played an important role in the Kant family's rise from the position of count to the present duke of the northern region. His daughter was a little surprised when she heard that Prince Roland had conquered King's City in one day, but she soon calmed down. Now you know why I didn't agree to marry Timothy at that time, right? Calvin couldn't help but widen his eyes. Did you expect all of this at that time? After Timothy had led the army to defeat Duke Ace, who intended to rebel, he had stayed in the northern region for a period of time. Like most men, he also fancied the pearl of the northern region, but Edith did not agree immediately. Instead, she cleverly rejected the messenger sent by the other side with an excuse. At that time, he was quite puzzled and even blamed his daughter. After all, many women dreamed of becoming the queen after marrying Timothy, and the Kant's position in the north would naturally be more stable. You said he conquered the city in one day? No, he didn't. Edith untied her belt and let her long cyan hair fall down. I just don't think he's the right person. Not the right person. Carr could not help but groan in his heart. He was the ruler of Grey Castle. No matter how short his term was, he was a veritable king of a country. If even such a person was not suitable, what kind of person did she want to marry? However, the Duke did not say this out loud. He had already made up his mind that if his daughter refused to marry, he would pass the title of Duke to Edith. He believed that compared to his two sons, his eldest daughter was the best successor who could carry forward the family. Back to this matter. Edith bent down to pick up the broken porcelain cup on the ground. The first thing you have to do is to catch up with the troops you sent out. But they've set out for 4 days, and we don't know which way they took. I'm afraid it's too late. It doesn't matter. She arranged the broken pieces into the shape of the 3 cities. You send people to Deep Valley Town first. If you set out now, they can arrive in the evening. Tomorrow morning, you can take a boat to King's City. In this way, you should be able to arrive 1 day earlier than the troops. No matter which way the troops take, they will eventually converge on the official road at the North Gate. As long as you search in the opposite direction, you can stop them on the outskirts of King's City. I see. Damn it, he should have thought of this method too. The Duke patted his head hard. It was all because of the sudden news that he could not come to his senses for a while. I'll write a letter now. No, let the guards go with the token. Guards. After the guards left, Edith continued to say slowly, Father, do you think we can stop Prince Roland's attack? Carr could not help but shiver. The outer wall of Evernight City was not even half as solid as that of King's City. He was afraid that in front of that kind of fire-like weapon, it would not be able to withstand for a long time. I think we can't. So it's not enough to just call back the troops. She shrugged. Don't forget that you became the Duke because of Timothy. In Roland's eyes, you're no different from an enemy. Even if he doesn't come now, he'll come sooner or later. So if we want our family to survive, we have to do more and be more proactive. You mean, you want me to pledge allegiance to Prince Roland? Carr hesitated. Why should he trust me? Because of sincerity, Edith said softly. After the result of this siege, I'm afraid that most of the nobles will be afraid. Since they can't join forces to resist, they might as well admit defeat as soon as possible. Of course, I'm not the only one who thinks so. So we have to show our sincerity. Otherwise, how can we stand out among the other nobles? What kind of sincerity? Edith smiled and pulled out the wooden training sword with one hand. Before Carr could react, she smashed 2 of the 3 pieces on the table into powder like lightning. Chapter 525. In the evening, Carr summoned all the nobles of the northern region to the castle. The banquet hall was ablaze with a roaring fire, which cast shadows on the walls. The swaying flames made the shadows dance up and down, like a weird mural. 4 long tables in the middle of the hall were filled with steaming hot dishes of meat and wine. It looked like a sumptuous banquet, but the atmosphere was not relaxed, especially when the Duke announced the news that the king's city had been conquered. I've sent people to catch up with the team that set off 4 days ago. If they're lucky, they'll be able to come back alive, he said in a deep voice, sitting in the main seat. The question is, what should we do in the northern region? The nobles looked at each other. The news that Timothy had failed to defend the city for a day was too shocking. For a moment, no one in the hall dared to answer. Carr saw fear and regret in the eyes of many of the lesser nobles. Edith was right. It was absolutely impossible for such people to resist Roland Wimbledon. The choice of dividing the land and becoming king had never existed from the beginning. In fact, they only had one way to go. However, for the nobles who had just turned to Timothy, it was a little embarrassing to suddenly change sides. After a while, someone said, "How about we send a messenger to probe Prince Roland's intentions? If he doesn't interfere with the affairs of the northern region, we might as well support him as king." This remark was immediately approved by another minor noble. After all, it's Wimbledon's own business. It doesn't matter who becomes king. Earl Lister sneered. All the same? Carr raised his eyebrows. Here comes the point. Sure enough, after the Earl spoke, everyone lowered their voices, which made him quite uncomfortable. In fact, there was not much difference between the 3 families. The Kant family was even a little weaker. It was just that he followed his daughter's idea and expressed his goodwill to Timothy first. That was how he got the title of Duke. Of course, he also understood that this was one of the new king's means of checks and balances. Timothy was probably happy to see the contempt and dissatisfaction of the other 2 families. Have you forgotten about Duke Ace, who was executed for treason? Lister said coldly. He didn't take the initiative to provoke Timothy. If we give in at the beginning, the noose will be around our necks at any time, and it will be too late to struggle. From Prince Roland's point of view, we are really involved in the rebellion. At least, every one of us is related to Timothy. What can we do even if we don't give in? Even the king's city couldn't survive a day. We're just trying to break a rock with an egg. One of the vassals of the Carr Empire retorted in a low voice according to the agreement. Under the furious glare of the other party, the latter half of the sentence was barely audible. I don't care if it's an egg or not, I'm going to give it a try, Ed Hawes said loudly. The rebel king killed my brother. He will definitely pay for this. It's hard to say who's the egg. The mountains in the north are undulating, and there are dangerous roads everywhere. His army can gallop on the plains and rivers, but it's not certain that they can win in the north. Earl Hawes followed closely. At worst, the Horsehead family will retreat to Coldwind Ridge. I don't believe that his army can fly up there. If you do that, you'll be exposing your back to the church, Carr Empire thought to itself. Those people also harbor evil intentions towards the north. He had also heard about the death of the eldest son of the Hawes family. It seemed that he had died in a battle against the Lord of the Western region. But how could there be no deaths in a war? If shouting could make the other party pay the price, then there would be no need for a knight's sword and armor. The voices in the hall gradually became noisy. Due to the statements of the Lister Empire and the Hawes family, those who wanted to stay put and prepare for the attack gradually overwhelmed those who took the initiative to inquire about the situation and express their goodwill to Prince Roland. Although Calvin kept his mouth shut, he was starting to feel anxious in his heart. Will Edith be in trouble? After a long silence, Earl Lista looked at him and asked, "What do you think, Your Excellency?" Car Empire's heart trembled. It was finally his turn. "I called all of you here because I want to hear everyone's opinions. After all, this matter concerns the future of the North. We can't be too cautious." Earl Hawes interrupted impatiently. "Enough. I'm afraid you've already decided to pledge your loyalty to Prince Roland. Otherwise, why would those who express their weak opinions be your vassals? If you hand over your power now, you'll be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered." Calvin almost couldn't help but throw the wine glass in his hand. "In that case, we have nothing to talk about." Lista Empire stood up and walked towards the entrance of the banquet hall. "By the way, if you want Prince Roland to spare your life, you can also tie Edith up and offer her to him. I heard that guy is very attracted to beauties." The laughter of the crowd came to an abrupt end with the Earl's silence. Everyone could see the tip of a sword protruding from his back. The bloodstains on it shone dimly under the light of the fire. "Are you talking about me, Your Excellency Snow Fox? I can't pretend that I didn't hear you." The Earl's body slid to the side. A tall and slender armored warrior appeared in front of everyone. She pulled out her sword expressionlessly, stepped over Lista Empire, who was still twitching and struggling, and walked into the hall. It was Edith Kant. Car Empire's heart immediately calmed down. There were dark red bloodstains all over her armor, and it was obvious that she had just gone through a fierce battle. Even so, her elegant demeanor was still the same as usual, and there was a hint of killing intent in her beautiful face. Then a group of sword-wielding warriors filed in and surrounded the hall in an instant. At this point, everyone understood what had happened. "Guards!" Earl Hawes' eyes widened. "What about the guards outside? If I don't get rid of them, how can I focus on dealing with you?" Car Empire let out a long sigh and smashed his cup on the ground. "You seem to have forgotten that I'm the one in charge of the northern region." He had been waiting for this moment. This kind of banquet would be held once in a while. The nobles were not very vigilant. There would not be more than 100 guards accompanying them, and most of them were stationed outside the castle district. It was the perfect time to catch them all in one fell swoop. When the guards of the other party were successfully dealt with, the situation was basically set. Of course, the decision-maker and executor of this plan was his daughter, the Pearl of the Northern Region, Edith. The door of the banquet hall slowly closed. The fire in the furnace swayed with the cold wind. The vassals of the two families pulled out their swords, while the lesser nobles were scared out of their wits. "You're crazy," Ed Hawes said through gritted teeth. Car Empire no longer cared about arguing. "Those who lay down their weapons and surrender will be spared. If anyone resists, kill without mercy." Chapter 526. The hall erupted into a frenzy. The wooden table was overturned, and the dishes on the table made cracking sounds. Soup flowed through the cracks in the stone floor. It was the first time the two sons sitting beside the Duke had witnessed a life-and-death battle at such a close distance. The older Cole pulled out his sword and stood in front of his father, but his posture was extremely stiff. He did not have the carefree attitude he had during his daily training. The 17-year-old Lance simply shrank behind his chair. Calvin sighed inwardly. If it wasn't for Edith, the two of them might not have been so pathetic. However, when compared to the Pearl of the Northern Region, the gap between them was huge. Perhaps even they themselves had already accepted their fate and lost the courage to chase after her. The Duke looked towards the center of the banquet hall. His eldest daughter had already set her eyes on Ed Hawes, the strongest person present. She first picked up a bottle of ale and smashed it at him, forcing him to turn around. Then, she leaped up onto a long wooden table and swung her sword at him from above. Her movements were as swift as a snow civet. Ed hurriedly blocked, and sparks flew from the point of contact. In a few breaths, Edith had already swung her sword 5 or 6 times. The clanging sounds formed a chain, like the footsteps of the Grim Reaper approaching. But at this critical moment, Ed exploded with an astonishing aura and completely dissolved the attacks. The two of them were locked in a battle around the long table. Several Hawes family knight had fallen to the sword, but he did not retreat. Instead, he became more and more courageous as he fought. Carr could not help but worry. Edith had already gone through a huge battle. The bloodstains on her armor were proof. Even if she was not injured, she must have used up a lot of energy. In addition, women were naturally weaker in terms of strength. This kind of entanglement was obviously disadvantageous to her. But there was not a trace of fear on Edith's face. Her eyes were fixed on her opponent. Her bright eyes were like twinkling stars. Every time she swung her sword, sweat could be seen on the tips of her hair. Even though her strength was gradually weakening, she still chose to use airtight attacks to suppress her opponent. Ed seemed to have noticed this. He roared and raised his sword to counterattack. The Pearl of the Northern Kingdoms was obviously unwilling to exchange blood for blood. She withdrew her sword and blocked. The difference in strength finally showed itself. Edith's long sword was shaken off, and she lost her balance and fell from the long table. The Duke's heart was in his throat. Damn it! Go help her! However, even the nearest guard could not help him. Everything happened too quickly. After Edith landed, she did not immediately get up. Instead, she chopped off the leg of the long table. At that moment, Ed Hawes jumped onto the long table with both hands raised high, wanting to use a powerful chop to end his opponent's life. He did not notice that Edith had fallen on the edge of the long table. What happened next left Carr dumbfounded. The knight who lost a leg on the table completely lost his balance. If it was only the table that toppled over, he might have been able to jump away easily. However, at that moment, all his strength was concentrated on his arms. His feet were nailed to the table, and his body leaned forward. It was a standard chopping movement. Aida fell to the ground like a dog eating mud. His head hit the floor heavily, and the dull thud was so loud that even he could hear it clearly. There would be no turning back. Edith jumped onto Aida's back, took out a dagger from her waist, and stabbed it straight into Aida's neck. With a twist of her hands, the knight's body convulsed as if he was having a stroke. Was this a coincidence? The Duke realized that he had fallen into Edith's trap the moment he jumped onto the long table. From the beginning when his opponent occupied the high ground to the time when he took back the high ground, he saw hope in his heart to turn defeat into victory. And the advantage he had accumulated from competing in strength made him think of violent attacks as the best way to determine victory or defeat. The opponent's increasingly weak resistance boosted Aida's confidence, so he used all his strength in the last blow. If it was a normal fight, Edith would never be able to block this blow. But this also made him completely lose the chance to adjust his balance. In the face of 3 times the number of their own, the resistance of the 2 nobles did not last too long. After a quarter of an hour, the banquet hall quieted down again. The fire was still burning quietly, but there was a bloody smell in the wantonly flowing wine. The Duke walked down from the main seat and looked around. The lesser nobles all lowered their heads, and no one dared to look at him. Earl Lista and Earl House have been punished for plotting against King Wimbledon. Now you have a choice. Will you obey the 2 bodies on the ground, or will you serve the new king? This time, the answer was uniform, and no other noise could be heard. That's it. In the study, Carwin wiped the blood on his daughter's forehead with a handkerchief. Will King Roland Wimbledon accept us? You called him a rebel king yesterday, Edith joked. You've decided to submit to him so soon? That's what you said. The Duke glared at her. Since we can't win, we might as well surrender as soon as possible. If we can't win His Majesty's trust, we'll become the enemies of the nobles. The execution of 2 great nobles without a trial by the arbitral tribunal had broken the basic bottom line of the nobles' war. If it weren't for the fact that the Kingdom of Greycastle had been at war for the past 2 years and that the lords had changed one after another, as well as the example set by Timothy, he would never have dared to kill them as Edith had suggested. I don't know. What? The Duke's heart trembled, and he almost dropped the handkerchief. You don't know? Yes, we can only try our best to show our sincerity, but the final decision of the northern region is still Prince Roland himself. Don't get it wrong, Father, Edith said carelessly. He may still send his trusted followers to take over the northern region, and your title may also be cut off. This is not something to be surprised about. I only know that if we don't try, the Kant family will have no chance. Compared with the doomed destruction, at least we have a chance to continue. Carwin was stunned for a long time, and then he sat down in a chair sullenly. He knew his daughter was right, but he still found it hard to accept such an answer. He did not want to lose the title of Duke. Edith suddenly laughed. Don't be discouraged, father. Tomorrow morning, you still have to take advantage of the situation to recover the mansions and fiefs of the two earls. Besides, the final outcome of this matter will largely depend on how capable the person who defers to us can be. She paused. Sincerity is the ticket to our negotiation, but ability determines the outcome of the negotiation. Carwin frowned. You mean? Chapter 527. King's City. After a year and a half, he was back. Bhairav looked at the cyan stone wall that was gradually becoming clearer, his heart filled with excitement. In fact, from the moment he had received the order, his mood had not calmed down. His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince had defeated Timothy as expected, and had done it so cleanly and efficiently. The result had once again proved that no one could resist the army of the Lord of the Western region. Of course, it was no longer appropriate to still call Roland the Lord of the Western region. He was now the only son of Wimbledon III, the inheritor of his bloodline, and the legal heir of the royal family. The obstacles to his ascension had been swept away. It was foreseeable that Roland would soon be crowned king. And he would also become the prime minister whose power was second only to the king. This joy made Bhairav immersed in boundless reverie. When those old friends, who missed him, saw that he had climbed to a position that they did not even dare to imagine, what kind of expression would they show? Shock, jealousy, envy, even if they gnashed their teeth, forced a smile, and desperately tried to please him? These scenes made him physically and mentally happy just thinking about it. It would be even better if his former mentor, the Minister of Finance, Lauren Moore, could see this scene. The cement boat slowly docked at the suburban pier. Bhairav walked down the trestle, and together with Kyle Sichi and the others, they passed through the familiar streets and entered the inner city palace under the escort of the soldiers of the First Army. The two-tower palace was still as majestic as he remembered. In the past, he could only look at it from his small room in the city hall, but now he could walk into the palace above board. He went straight to the study of the tower and saw Roland Wimbledon again. Bhairav knelt down on one knee with excitement and said, "Your Majesty, the kingdom of Grey Castle is yours." In fact, not yet. The eastern region and the northern region are still the territories of Timothy's remaining forces. Roland smiled and said, "Get up quickly, we still have many important things to discuss." His expression was as usual, and his tone was calm and approachable, as if he was completely unaffected by the upcoming title of king. Bhairav's attitude became even more respectful. He slowly stood up, placed his hand on his chest, and replied, "Yes, Your Majesty. The most important task at the moment is to maintain the operation of the King's City. I've already explained this in the letter." Roland poured a cup of hot tea and handed it to him. "Do you have a preliminary plan?" Bhairav hurriedly took the teacup. "It's not difficult to maintain the current order. You can let me handle the minor nobles. They will understand the pros and cons. Besides, I've brought 10 of my most outstanding disciples from the border area. Some of them are proficient in business, and some are good at taxation. Even if I'm not here, they'll keep an eye on the city hall, and those nobles won't be able to steal anything." He paused for a moment and then added, "But you have to let the First Army stay behind, cooperate with them in the supervision work. Without the guarantee of force, the supervision will not be able to play the role of warning." Roland looked a little surprised. "Don't you want to stay in the capital?" "Of course not, Your Majesty," Bhairav replied without hesitation. "The government affairs of Neverwinter are much more complicated and important. I can't leave for too long. If you handle these trivial matters yourself, it'll be too tiring. Please let me continue to manage the Neverwinter City Hall for you. It's more suitable for me to serve you." He was very clear that since His Majesty had decided that Neverwinter would be the new capital of Grey Castle, it would surpass this city sooner or later. Now that Grey Castle's population and development potential had surpassed King's City, and with the launch of the new batch of recruitment plans, Neverwinter would undoubtedly surpass any big city in the Four Kingdoms. Although he could experience the wailing of those old friends in King City, he would get tired of hearing it too often. Moreover, these wailing would not bring him power. Instead, it would gradually pull him away from the center of power. Bhairav was well aware that only by appearing in front of His Majesty often could he leave a deep impression on him. Roland stared at him with great interest for a while until Bhairav lowered his head guiltily. Roland then agreed. That's all. But the premise is that King's City won't fall into chaos because of the change of officials in the city hall. You should know that I need everyone in this city. His Majesty then asked Bhairav about the mining and farming situation in the Longsong area, especially about the latter, including whether the serfs were responsible for the division of fields and the promotion rules had been properly announced. Fortunately, Bhairav was very clear about Roland's preferences. He had learned about them from Perrault in advance, so he answered smoothly and His Majesty could not help but nod. The afternoon passed quickly. After asking the last question, Roland patted Bhairav on the shoulder with satisfaction. You've done a good job. Now I can rest assured while leading the army to fight outside. Let's have dinner first. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the development plan of the Longsong area. Yes. Bhairav hesitated. He found that the coronation was the only thing that Roland did not ask about. Your Majesty, when are you going to ascend the throne and announce it to the world? I don't plan to do that at the moment, Roland replied casually. What? The director of the city hall could not believe his ears. It's better to carry out this kind of thing as soon as possible. It can bring you great prestige and unite the people in your territory. It won't do you any harm. Why do you? Because of time, Roland interrupted him. He got up and walked to the window, looking at the magnificent city in the dusk. I've asked the ceremonial officer. A complete coronation ceremony will take several months to prepare. In addition to casting the golden crown and gemstone scepter, we also have to send invitations to the church and the other 3 kingdoms. We can't start until their messengers arrive. Even if we exclude the holy city of Hermes, the kingdom of Everwinter, and the kingdom of Wolfheart, it will still take more than a month to contact the kingdom of Dawn, which will seriously hinder the second half of the spring offensive. You can simplify the process. That way, the prestige will be greatly reduced or even negatively affected. He shrugged. Even Timothy followed the process, so I can't be more anxious than him. But the ambassador to the Kingdom of Dawn will set off soon. I'll ask him to bring the news with him. It won't be too late to think about it when I get a definite answer. After Bhairav left, Roland let out a sigh of relief. There was another reason he did not explain to Bhairav, which was that he was deeply influenced by the idea of accumulating grain before becoming king. Now he only occupied the western region, which was less than 1/3 of what Timothy had when he was king. It was better to restrain himself before the church officially attacked the Kingdom of Dawn. It would be troublesome if Hermes targeted him first. Although he was not afraid of openly falling out with the church, he did not want to make others hate him. Then he summoned Kyle Sichi to his study. Chapter 528. The refining hall in the Eastern City District was Retinan's favorite place. The apprentices and disciples carried the required materials back and forth. Steam rose from the utensils, and the smell of sulfur and acidic water lingered in the room. Occasionally, the sound of glass bottles shattering and the loud curses of alchemists could be heard. This place was always full of vitality. Even though he had already been promoted to one of the 3 chief disciples 2 years ago and had his own independent alchemy room, the bustling and chaotic hall made it easier for him to burst forth with inspiration. Alchemy was just like this busy scene. When all kinds of substances were mixed together, most of them would become more turbid. Only a few could stand out and blossom with a bright brilliance. The crystal glass was like this, and so was the strong snow powder. After being burned, melted, and mixed, no one knew that gray sand and black charcoal could be transformed into such a wonderful thing. This was the charm of alchemy. People were no exception. Every year, a large number of new apprentices joined the Alchemist Union. However, only a few of them could shed their rough and dull appearance and become the brightest stars of the Union. Retnin was one of them. It had taken him 34 years to be promoted from an apprentice to a chief alchemist union. Now he was nearly 50 years old and about to reach the end of his life. However, he felt that his life was complete now that he could comprehend the beauty of the sage's study. However, the recent events in King's City made Retnine feel a little uneasy. The biggest change was the succession of the king. After Prince Roland hanged Timothy, he had become the unquestionable successor. This had nothing to do with the alchemist union. No matter who the king was, they only needed to provide alchemy products. However, when the strong snow powder was given to Timothy as a war material, could they still stay out of it? King's City had gradually returned to peace, but Prince Roland did not visit the alchemist union. Instead, he went to the astrological tower, which seemed to be a bad sign. Are you still thinking about the astrological association? Someone beside him suddenly said, "It's not like you to be in a daze by the window with a bitter face." To be able to speak to him so rudely, he must also be a first seat. He tilted his head and looked at Rayleigh, whose hair was also white. What do you think? His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince is planning? He thinks those guys who stare at the stars all day are wasting money. What else could he mean? Rayleigh said nonchalantly. It's a pity that he didn't insist on his opinion. Those people don't deserve to be called sages at all. They should have been dismissed long ago. As one of the two great schools, the Alchemist Union had planted its own spy in the Stargazer Association. He had heard a little about the purpose of Roland's visit to the astrology station. However, he did not know what the chief astrologer had discussed with Prince Roland. In the end, he gave up the idea of closing the astrology station. What's wrong? Are you worried that the Alchemist Union will also fall to such a state? He patted Retnine on the shoulder and said, "Don't forget how much profit our products can bring to King's City. As long as the restrictions on the production of crystal glass and perfume are lifted, the golden dragon earned in a year or two will be enough to fill up the prince's bedroom. Will he be willing to close the association? But the association will refine strong snow powder for Timothy. So what? Can we disobey the king's order?" Rayleigh snorted. If he has any common sense in his head, he won't use this as an excuse to blame us. Besides, he also has a large number of snow powder weapons. Didn't he get the formula from the defector boar? It's also the Alchemist Union's credit that he successfully conquered King's City. Maybe we'll be rewarded if we give him a better mixture formula. I hope so. Retnine nodded and felt a little relieved. As Rayleigh had said, the Alchemist Union was a big gold producer. Prince Roland might have been caught up in some trifles that he did not come immediately. Just as he was about to give some advice to the other alchemists, a disciple rushed into the hall out of breath and shouted, "Chief, Chief, His Majesty is here." "What? Where is he?" Following Retnine's exclamation, the noise in the hall suddenly quieted down. Everyone turned to look at the newcomer. Above the courtyard, the disciple swallowed and said, "His Majesty came from the sky." Retnine and Rayleigh looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. "Tell Chief Archer to come here. The rest of you, follow me to meet His Majesty." "Yes." Outside the Alchemist Union, a huge floating ball occupied almost half of the sky. Soldiers armed with snow powder weapons had surrounded the courtyard. After they searched both inside and outside the Union, the floating ball began to descend slowly. "That should be the device that Prince Roland used to carry the witches to the astrological tower," Rayleigh whispered to Retnine. "I didn't expect it to fly." "Anyway, he's finally here." Retnine was a little relieved. He grabbed Rayleigh's arm and said, "It's okay for us to call him Prince in private, but we have to be respectful when we meet. Even if he doesn't have an enthronement ceremony, he's still the king of Grey Castle. Don't be too casual." "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing," Retnine said with a smile. The basket landed steadily. A spirited gray-haired man came forward under the protection of the guards. He didn't wear any gorgeous clothes, nor did he wear a crown or scepter, but his every movement had an unquestionable majesty. He was completely different from the incompetent fourth prince who was previously rumored to be. Next to him was an old man in a robe. Retnine found the old man looked familiar to him. "Your Majesty Wimbledon, welcome to the Alchemist Union." Led by the 3 chief alchemists, the alchemists bowed together. His Majesty smiled and said, "When I was still in King's City, my father often mentioned you. Crystal glass and perfume are all very popular alchemy products. They are even sold to the Fjord Islands and bring great returns to the palace. So when my father sent me to Border Town, I built an alchemy workshop there." Rayleigh almost burst out laughing. Retneen tried his best to control his laughter, but he did not show it on his face. "That's not easy, Your Majesty. There's an old saying that every alchemy workshop is built with an equal amount of golden dragon." "Really? But I didn't invest much in the golden dragon. You should know how barren that place is. At first, I could only build a few wooden sheds as refining rooms. Now it produces many products, including glass and perfume," His Majesty said in a relaxed manner. "So I'm curious about where you spend the golden dragon every year." What? What do you mean?" Retnin's heart sank. "This is my chief alchemist, Mr. Kyle Sichi." Roland pointed to the old man beside him. "He'll be inspecting your alchemy achievements. If you haven't made any new products in the past few years, I think it's better for the Alchemist Union to close. After all, King's City has just gone through a war. Many streets and houses need to be repaired with Golden Dragon." His words caused an uproar among the alchemists. Chapter 529. "Oh." Roland looked at him and asked, "Why?" "Here's the thing, Your Majesty. You don't know much about alchemy, so you may have been deceived." Retneen hurriedly stopped Rayleigh. He was a proud man and even lacked respect in front of Timothy, not to mention Prince Roland, who was once regarded as ignorant and incompetent. If Rayleigh was annoyed, everyone would be in trouble. Alchemy is ever-changing. Every formula represents a new result, but not all results are as dazzling as snow powder. It may not be directly transformed into a golden dragon, but it can be the foundation for the birth of another outstanding product. "Exactly," Rayleigh said discontentedly. "Take the strong snow powder for example. The ice saltpeter in it is transformed from feces, which is an alchemy reaction in itself. But in addition to making ice, it can also be mixed with other alchemy products to make snow powder. These uses all require a long time to explore and ponder. Even the most experienced alchemy master wouldn't dare to say that a reaction result is meaningless. Your Majesty, their value can't be simply measured by the golden dragon." He frowned and stared at the chief alchemist of Roland. "If anyone dares to make such a promise to you, he must be a liar. What do you think?" Roland tilted his head and asked. The chief alchemist did not seem to be in a hurry. He first touched his beard, and when no one spoke, he put his hand on his chest and said, "Your Majesty, the reason why they said that is because their understanding of alchemy is still superficial. I can prove to you that their formulas are no longer new, and their results have all been determined whether they are useful or not." The alchemists sucked in a breath of cold air when they heard that. Retneen was stunned for a while before he came to himself. Did this man know what he was talking about? He knew every alchemy formula like the back of his hand? What a joke! The alchemist workshop of King's City had discovered more than a dozen new formulas in the past 2 years. It would take several days just to study them. How dare this man say that there was nothing new? Retneen was surprised and delighted at the same time. This man named Kyle Sichi was completely crazy. As long as he gave a formula that he could not explain, he would be deceiving His Majesty. The most taciturn of them all, Archer, could not hold it in any longer. He said coldly, "How do you want to prove it?" "It's very simple." Kyle confidently walked in front of the 3 people. "You lay out the raw materials, and I'll tell you the result of the alchemy. How about it?" Rayleigh was so angry that he laughed. "Very well. The association has all the materials and can verify them at any time. If you're wrong, don't think you can hide it from His Majesty like you did in Border Town." "What if I'm right?" "This is impossible." Archer repeatedly shook his head. Alchemy formulas can indeed repeat, but it's impossible to exhaust them. You're looking down on alchemy too much. "It's not that I'm looking down on alchemy, it's just that it's wrong in the first place." Lucien's expression was strange. Retneen felt his forehead throbbing. "What did you say?" Let me ask you something first. What is alchemy in your eyes? Kyle remained unmoved. Chaotic, complex, ever-changing, and difficult to understand? You know nothing about alchemy, or the nature of all things. That's nonsense. Rayleigh loudly scolded. Are you trying to say that this philosopher's study is simple, orderly, and single-minded? If that's the case, how can it evolve so many colorful substances and make every stone in this world different? To Retnin's horror, Kyle chuckled and said, "Ah yes. It's simple, orderly, and single-minded. As for why this world is so colorful, it's beyond the scope of alchemy," Kyle said calmly. "In other words, it's a higher realm, and I've just seen the threshold." Enough. Retnin pulled Rayleigh, whose beard was about to stand up. "Take your disciples to prepare the alchemy materials. Any absurd remarks will fall apart in the face of facts. Otherwise, if he continued to speak, it was possible that he would curse Kyle and His Majesty Roland, who had recruited him to be the chief disciple. This man is indeed a lunatic. Alchemy is simple and orderly? Retnin thought bitterly. He would definitely teach the man a lesson he would never forget. A long table in the center of the refining hall was cleared out. On it were several small bottles and 3 pieces of white paper, on which were the names of the raw materials. After a discussion, the 3 chief disciples each chose a formula and asked Kyle Sichi to prove his theory. In order to leave the impression that His Majesty was not deliberately making things difficult for them and to avoid Kyle's unreasonable pestering, the 3 of them also wrote down the names of the raw materials. As for whether Kyle could recognize them or not, it was none of their business. When everything was ready, Retnin looked at His Majesty's chief alchemist and said in a low voice, "Please start." The latter walked confidently to the first piece of white paper on the table. Calcination of saltpeter and green alum? He glanced at the content on the paper and looked a little surprised. "You've also discovered the double stone acid-making method. The products are a variety of solids and acids. The latter can corrode metals." As he answered, he picked up a pen and wrote a long list of symbols on the paper. Archer, who had set the question, looked very upset. The surrounding alchemists all whispered to each other. Probably no one had expected that the first chief disciple's formula would be answered in less than a second. "Quiet," Retnin shouted. "There are 2 more questions." He just happened to get it right. Rayleigh stamped his foot. He wasn't so lucky with the second formula. By the way, what are the things he wrote on the paper? He shook his head as a bad premonition arose in his heart. However, the development of the facts quickly deviated from their expectations. Kyle didn't even stay at the table for too long before he announced the result and also pointed out the trap set by Rayleigh. Green vitriol and copper plates? If the acid content is too low, the reaction can't be carried out. If the acid content is high, the liquid will turn blue and bubbles will come out. Retnin's problem did not cause him any trouble. Take out the netherworld stone? Is there no other condition? Kyle grabbed the bottle and shook it. He looked at the white solid immersed in the water. This thing is quite rare. If left alone in the air, it will spontaneously combust and produce white smoke. Finally, the white solid will be left. Am I right? Retnin was completely shocked. This was a strange item that he had exchanged with the alchemists of the kingdom of Wolfheart. Few people had seen it, let alone its characteristics. You can also ask questions. Kyle turned around and looked at the surrounding alchemists. "I'll prove to you that what I said is true." The crowd immediately became excited. "What about a mixture of ochre and charcoal? If the temperature is high enough, you can get iron. It's a special kind of iron ore. Why does the color of the glass produced by smelting sand and stone vary? Didn't you say that alchemy didn't change the color? Because the impurities in it are different, so the crystal glass needs the purest gravel." "Sir Kyle, I have a question." Retnin was surprised to find that the atmosphere in the hall was changing rapidly. The alchemists had changed from asking questions to asking for advice. Even the way they addressed Kyle had become respectful. He realized that Kyle was becoming the chief alchemist in everyone's hearts. "Shut up, all of you," Rayleigh suddenly shouted. These are just formulas that the Alchemist Union has figured out a long time ago. If you really know all the formulas like the back of your hand, then make a formula that no one has seen before. For example, the ultimate pursuit of alchemy. This is impossible. Retnin swallowed. He believed that all the alchemists present had the same idea. After all, the ultimate pursuit originated from a legend. But he was shocked to find that Kyle was smiling. Chapter 5:30. Have you already extracted the Philosopher's Stone? Archer asked in a trembling voice. The hall was silent for a moment. This was probably the answer everyone wanted to know. The Philosopher's Stone was rumored to be the pinnacle of alchemy. It had the ability to transform everything, which was also the reason why alchemy was called the philosopher's study. When used as a medium, it could turn ordinary iron and lead into precious metals, giving people endless wealth. This was the origin of the Midas touch. A stone that can transform everything. That's just something invented by ancient alchemists who wanted to be lazy. Kyle waved his hand. What I'm going to show you is the mystery of the world. He took out a strange crystal glass tube from his waist bag and generously displayed it in front of the alchemists. Everyone craned their necks, including Retnin. The tube was about 2 fingers thick, and both ends were sealed. There was some brownish-red powder in the tube, which was plain and dull. At first glance, it looked like dry soil, and no one knew how it was filled. Kyle then asked someone to bring a glass of clean water, picked up a green alum stone from the table, and smashed one end of the glass tube. There was a commotion in the crowd. Even Retnin felt a great pain in his heart. The transparent and flawless luster was clearly high-quality crystal glass. Furthermore, it must have taken a lot of effort for a craftsman to fire it into such a well-proportioned tube shape. In the end, the other party had just smashed the tube open. However, this also made him realize that Prince Roland's claim that crystal glass had been developed in his territory was not a lie. The alchemy workshop of King City would never produce such a strange container. The water was quickly served. Kyle poured the powder in the tube into a glass. The water slowly turned yellowish-green, and the powder disappeared. Do you have lead rods here? He turned around and said, Bring 2 of the best quality. Wait. Rayleigh said, since it's an alchemy reaction, it doesn't matter who does it, right? I've seen some street performers who are very good at camouflage. They can change bronze royals into gold royals in front of everyone's eyes. I'm not doubting you, but it's better to be more cautious in this kind of situation. He looked at the other 2 chiefs. What do you think? Indeed, Archer said slowly. Retnin hesitated for a moment. Everyone could see that Rayleigh was suspicious, and it was rude to compare Rayleigh to a street performer. However, he had to stand on the Alchemist Union's side at this time. I also agree. I thought that the chief alchemist of Border Town would fly into a rage, but I didn't expect that Kyle Sichi would just smile and say, Of course, the last step will be done by an alchemist or an apprentice. As I said, the essence of alchemy is simple, orderly, and single-minded. Who's next? Let me do it. Retnin felt his heart beating so fast that he did not even dare to look into Kyle's eyes. However, he could not resist the temptation of the Midas touch. Could this yellow-green liquid really turn lead into gold? The apprentice quickly fetched the materials. These were lead rods that had been repeatedly refined. They were greenish-white in color and were usually placed in wooden boxes lined with cotton cloth. They were the best in stock. Retnin picked one up and carefully put it in the cup. Then he was surprised to find that the surface of the lead bar had a touch of gold. He felt his hands tremble uncontrollably. Something seems to be growing. Gold. My God, it's gold. Is that gold? Maybe it's copper. The discussion behind Retnin suddenly became louder. He looked back and saw that all the alchemists and apprentices were staring at the change in the cup on the long table with their eyes wide open. Their voices were full of shock and disbelief. Archer looked confused, as if he had lost his sense of direction. At this moment, he also felt the same way. Was alchemy really as Kyle had said? Was it really the same as what Kyle had said? Was it completely simple and clear, and the chaos and disorder that he had thought was only because he had taken the wrong path? Then what was the purpose of their decades of study? When the lead bar was taken out, its surface was already blooming with coral-like filaments. These are all copper. Rayleigh bit his lip and shouted with the last of his strength, "You can't possibly know how to turn stone into gold. It's unreasonable. Otherwise, you could have used the golden dragon to buy the whole Grey Castle instead of just being the chief alchemist of a small town." "I didn't choose this path for the golden dragon. I wanted to know more about this world." Kyle's voice seemed to come from far away. "If you don't believe me, you can test it. I think the chief of King's City knows how to distinguish between copper and gold, right?" However, there was no reversal after the test. The gold filaments on the lead bar were cut off, put on a plate, and baked over the fire. Soon they melted and gathered into a ball. This was obviously not copper. Copper would become an ugly solid under high temperature. The rolling metal solution on the plate shone even brighter, like a bright golden sun. True gold fears no fire. This was real gold. The hall was boiling with excitement. The alchemy formula of turning stone into gold really exists. "Sir Kyle, what do the symbols you wrote on the paper represent? Is that a formula for a higher realm? Where did you learn this knowledge? Chief, do you still accept disciples? I'm willing to start as an apprentice." Kyle Sichi reached out his hand to stop the noisy shouting. "Listen carefully. Everything you see today comes from an even more ancient subject. It not only includes all possible alchemy formulas, but also reveals the mystery of the composition of all things. Through it, you can even predict those alchemy formulas that you've never seen before, including turning stone into gold. As long as you follow me to the Western region, I can teach you all these." "To the Western region?" Retneen looked at His Majesty Roland Wimbledon, who was smiling, and froze on the spot. Is this Roland's real purpose? However, it was too late for him to realize this. The enthusiastic atmosphere was completely out of his control. Who would want to work for the Alchemy Association if they could learn the art of turning stone into gold? None of the alchemists in the hall would stay here. The Alchemy Association of King's City, which had a history of 100 years, was going to collapse in one day. In a trance, Retneen saw Kyle slowly walk up to him. "Do you remember an apprentice who wanted to make the molten liquid 27 years ago?" He leaned over and whispered in Retneen's ear, "Because he failed twice, you robbed him of his money and refused to let him step into the association again. In fact, it was only because the acid you provided wasn't strong enough." Retneen shivered all over. His memory overlapped with the figure in front of him. He opened his mouth wide in surprise and said, "You're the apprentice I reviewed at that time." "Yes," Kyle nodded. "I'm just here to take back what I deserve." Chapter 5:31. 2 days later, Kyle Sichi said goodbye to Roland. "Don't you want to stay in King's City for a few more days?" Roland joked. "This is the center of Grey Castle. It's the best place to have fun in the kingdom. If I miss it this time, I don't know when I can come here again." "I'm not you. I don't want to leave any unfinished love here." Kyle rolled his eyes. "There's still a lot of work to be done in the laboratory and the chemical plant. If you want the gunpowder production line to run normally, you'd better let me return to Neverwinter first." Kyle's answer made Roland feel quite depressed. After the situation stabilized, the atmosphere in the city became a little strange. First, he heard many women claiming to be his lovers, and later, even his illegitimate children ran out. Of course, he knew these were all rumors, but he couldn't resist the power of public opinion. Especially when he had a really bad reputation before, no matter how bizarre the story was, people would believe it without a doubt. Helplessly, he had to ask Theo to come forward and order the rats to put out the rumors. Well, he was speechless for a while, then nodded and said, "I'll arrange a paddle steamer to send you back to the Western region. You've worked hard these days." "I'm glad that you know." Kyle shook his beard, put his hand on his chest, and then left. "This guy is really rude." Roland twitched his mouth, but in his heart he didn't care and even happily hummed a little song. "It seems that you're quite happy to be entangled by so many women." A cold voice came from behind. "Ahem. He almost choked on his saliva. What nonsense are you talking about? They just want to use this excuse to get some money. It's not like you don't know. How could I know? Nightingale's tone suddenly became a little flustered. You really don't know? Roland retorted. I thought you went to investigate everyone. Well, Nightingale showed up, turned over and sat on the desk, staring at him condescendingly. I did investigate, but I was worried about your safety. I was afraid that you would bring an unknown person into the palace. Do you understand? I understand, he said, trying not to laugh, but what she said next made his smile freeze on his face. Although most of them are fake, what about Miss Kingfisher and Lady Rother? They are not lying. Damn you, Yorko. I didn't expect that she would still remember it after I covered it up that day. Roland silently cursed this old friend 10,000 times. At the same time, he seriously stared into her eyes and said, I didn't lie to you. The fourth prince they mentioned is really not me. You should be able to tell that this is not a lie. Nightingale felt a little uncomfortable being stared at, so she averted her eyes slightly. So this is a misunderstanding? They thought it was you, but you weren't there? Of course not, Roland said righteously. In fact, I haven't even seen them. Her expression softened. Then these women who claim to have affairs with you, are you just going to let them continue to make noise? Theo said that you didn't order them to shut up. Of course, using the Golden Dragon's words is exactly what they want, but if we use force, it's too much, and it will increase the people's suspicion. Roland still couldn't order people to kill because of this kind of thing. Instead of forcibly blocking it, it's better to make a big news to attract people's attention. Big news? Nightingale was puzzled. Yes, it's something that will make them talk about it for weeks. He smiled. For example, King's City will be renamed City of Dawn, City of Neverwinter in the Western region will be the new King's City of Grey Castle, and so on. After I leave here, these rumors will also die down. Of course, the big news was far more than that. There was also the news that the king would not hold an enthronement ceremony for the time being, and the generous recruitment plan for craftsmen. All these news together were enough to occupy all the people's leisure time. At present, the rats were spreading fragments of the news so that the people could vaguely hear it. Finally, the city hall would put up an announcement to achieve the best publicity effect. It could be expected that this matter would be discussed in the tavern for a long time to come. So it wasn't because of them that you were so happy before? Of course not. Roland patted the list on the table. I was happy because of this. The chemistry performance led by Kyle was a great success, and the effect was better than he had imagined. In the end, there were more than 320 alchemists, disciples, and apprentices from the association who were willing to go to the Western region. Including their relatives, the final number was determined to be about 500. There were only 5 chemical laboratories and 2 chemical plants in the border area, but now the number has doubled in the blink of an eye. Moreover, most of them are experienced alchemists who can take up the post after a little training. It's the biggest fortune since we conquered King's City. He paused. But that's not what makes me the happiest. Then what makes you the happiest? Nightingale asked curiously. Look at this. He spread out the list and pointed to a few names at the end. Archer. Aren't these the names of the 3 chief alchemists of the Alchemist Association? Yes, Kyle didn't refuse them, Roland said softly. He said he had already taken back what belonged to him. After learning about the rift between the chief alchemist and the Alchemist Association of King's City, he had thought that Kyle would retaliate fiercely. Unexpectedly, Kyle did not choose to continue the hatred. After Kyle received the recognition that should have belonged to him, he accepted Retnine and the other 2 for Neverwinter. This filled Roland's heart with warmth. Although this era was terrible, there were still such a group of people walking on the right path. As long as they were in the territory, the kingdom would become better and better. At this time, there was a rhythmic knocking outside the window. Nightingale flashed out of the window, hugged the messenger in her arms, and then flashed back to the table. A secret letter has arrived. You scared it. Looking at the stunned gray falcon on the table, Roland shook his head and did not know whether to laugh or cry. He untied the note from his claws and quickly scanned the contents of the letter. It's from Scroll. I think we have to leave as soon as possible. Something happened in Neverwinter? Nightingale frowned. No. He grinned. Lotus and Honey will be back soon. Those two little guys. For some reason, Nightingale's voice sounded a little depressed. Actually, there's no need to rush back. After all, there are only two of them. Lightning and Maggie can pick them up. It's much faster than a hydrogen balloon. They can reach King's City in one day. Chapter 5:32. The vast and boundless sea was restored to its former blue color. The charming beauty braved the wind and waves, moving forward against the clear and crystalline waves. The hull rose and fell with the waves, issuing rhythmic creaking sounds. Pull up the sails. Boys, get moving. One-eyed Jack roared, we can reach the shoal today. The sailors on the mast shouted, pulling the 3-finger-thick hemp ropes and unfurling the sails little by little. On the sea, where the climate was constantly changing, this kind of operation of raising and lowering the sails happened several times a day. Lotus looked at the people who were crawling on top of her head. They looked just like monkeys. It's really troublesome, the old captain went to the side of the witches. If I could also have a ship like the one in Crescent Moon Bay that doesn't need to sail, it would be much easier. What's that thing called? Paddle steamer, Lotus said, raising her eyebrows. It's made by His Highness Roland. Why don't you ask His Highness to build one for you? Honey said while teasing the seabird on her shoulder. Other people can't speak in front of him, but you're different. Kid, why do you say it as if I'm very familiar with him? You're familiar with Lady Tilly? She stuck out her tongue. His Highness Roland is very good to Lady Tilly. Jack took a deep breath of his pipe, looking distressed. Forget it, I heard from that group of merchants that a paddle steamer costs more than 1,000 golden dragons. Even if I sold all of you, I still wouldn't be able to get that much. That's not necessarily true, Breeze joked. In the sleeping spell, Lotus's bounty is calculated by 100 golden dragons. Last time, that merchant called Durat Goldbeard also planned to use more than 1,000 golden dragons to keep her for a long time. Lotus alone is already so expensive, not to mention the 4 of us. Breeze. Lotus angrily punched him. You clearly know what he's planning. I don't want to hear his name again. I'm just kidding. Breeze took her into his arms and laughed softly. How could I be willing to sell you? After Lady Tilly heard about this, she specially negotiated with the Crescent Moon Bay Chamber of Commerce. In the future, no one will mention this again. You guys are so close, Jack puffed out a smoke ring. But, those two don't seem to talk to you very much, do they? At the mention of the other 2 witches, the 3 of them fell into a brief silence. After a while, Breeze said, they were witches from the kingdom of Wolfheart. The old captain was puzzled. Aren't they all witches? Compared to Lady Tilly, they support Heidi Morgan more. Morgan? Roland rubbed his chin and thought for a while. Is she a member of the royal family of the kingdom of Wolfheart? It's just a branch. Breeze waved his hand. It's nothing. We've only known each other for a short time, so we can't open our hearts to each other yet. The old man seemed to have realized something and did not continue to ask. Lotus did not know much about the affairs of the kingdom's nobility. She only knew that the witches on Sleeping Island were not like sisters like those in Bordertown. Most of them were from Grey Castle, but some were from the Kingdom of Dawn and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Since Tilly was the organizer of the migration and had the noblest status, everyone regarded her as their leader, and so did the foreign witches. However, after the church in the Fjord Islands was eradicated, the situation gradually changed. This was especially obvious to Lotus, who had just returned to Sleeping Island during the months of demons. After only a few months, the witches from the Kingdom of Wolfheart had gradually lived together and seldom talked to others during meals. According to Molly, they used to be members of the Bloodfang Association, which was similar to the Witch Cooperation Association of Grey Castle, and the leader of the Bloodfang Association was Heidi Morgan. When they first joined Sleeping Island, there were only about 20 witches in the Bloodfang Association, which was regarded as a minority on the island. If that was all, it would not have been a big deal. However, among the 20 witches, there were 18 combat witches. In other words, when they accepted members, they had selected in advance that only powerful witches could join, which was completely different from the Witch Cooperation Association and Sleeping Island. Because of this, they were extremely powerful in fighting. When Tilly carried out the cleaning plan, the witches from the Kingdom of Wolfheart took charge of the Twin Dragon Island Cathedral, which had the largest number of believers. Because of this, Heidi Morgan believed that the Bloodfang Association was the core of Sleeping Island. Lotus could feel it even if Heidi did not openly declare it. She did not like the idea that the status of combat witches was higher than that of non-combat witches. She also agreed with Lady Tilly's idea of equality for witches, but unfortunately, not everyone thought so. During the days when Lady Tilly was not here, Heidi had several conflicts with Camilla Derry, the chief butler of Sleeping Island. Fortunately, Camilla was also a noble in King City and was not weaker than Heidi in terms of momentum. In the end, Heidi had calmly defended herself. Thinking of this, Lotus sighed helplessly. She was not worried about what would happen to Lady Tilly. After all, Ashes, the strongest witch of Sleeping Island, was a strong supporter of Lady Tilly. As the only extraordinary who could fight with a god's stone of retaliation, as long as she was here, the entire Bloodfang Association would not be a match for Ashes. She was worried about her own trip. To be honest, she did not want to stay with the witches from the Kingdom of Wolfheart at all. Moreover, the selection of witches was very strange. Apart from herself and Honey, there were 2 combat witches among the other 3 people on the Charming Beauty. Lady Tilly should have known that His Highness Roland preferred auxiliary witches. His strange weapons were enough to enable ordinary people to fight against the judgment army of the church. In this case, why did he bring the witches from the Bloodfang Association? Lotus could not find an answer after thinking for a long time, so she had to put these distracting thoughts aside. Perhaps, Lady Tilly had her own considerations that she could not understand. When the sun was about to set in the west, the light golden shoal appeared in front of everyone. At the same time, a hot air balloon and a huge strange bird appeared in the air. My God, what is that? The sailors on the deck cried out in alarm. The strange bird folded its wings and swooped down toward the Charming Beauty. As the distance between them rapidly shortened, its sharp claws and bloody mouth could be clearly seen. Is there an enemy? The witches of the Bloodfang Association rushed out of the cabin upon hearing the noise and were also startled by the giant beast. What kind of monster is this? No matter what it is, we just need to catch it. The other witch quickly calmed down. My cage doesn't distinguish the size of the target. Wait, that's not an enemy, Lotus quickly stopped him. It's flying from the side of the hot air balloon. The other party glanced at her. A hot air balloon? It's a tool used by His Highness Roland to transport witches. Breeze stood in front of them and said, "Don't worry, just trust Lotus's judgment." The terrifying giant beast was getting closer and closer and gave a high-pitched roar, but Lotus felt that it was not a threat. Ow, ow, coo. Just as the monster was about to hit the sail, the huge figure suddenly disappeared, and then a white pigeon steadily landed on top of Lotus's head. Chapter 5:33. Is this really okay? What? Let Iffy and Softfeathers go to Border Town with Lotus. Ashes put her arms around Tilly, who was sitting in front of the desk. Did Heidi Morgan ask you to do this? Ever since she learned about the existence of the ceiling, Princess Tilly had been spending most of her time in her study. There were endless piles of books on her desk. Some were given to her by Roland, while others were found in the ruins. Seeing Princess Tilly drowned in books, Ashes felt an inexplicable pain in her heart. Tilly put down the quill and leaned back in a relaxed manner. She doesn't want me to be the only one in contact with the secular forces, and I have no reason to refuse her. That person is your brother. Why does she think she can be like you? Because she's also a member of the royal family. Tilly shook her head with a smile. The higher the status, the less familial love. It's the same in every kingdom. Heidi knows this very well, so she made this decision. Is she going to compete with you for the support of His Highness Roland? Ashes frowned. Of course not. This time, I think she's just going to inquire about the situation. Then why did you agree to her request? Ashes let go of her hands and said in a low voice, "It seems that I have to have a talk with her." It was Her Highness Tilly's affinity and tolerance that made the witches, who had been tortured and oppressed by the church, trust her and unite them. However, this did not mean that people could regard tolerance as weakness and trust as a test. If anyone wanted to break this, she would never let them go. Before Ashes could turn around, Tilly grabbed her arm and said, "Why don't you agree? As I said before, I have no reason to refuse. Sleeping Island is our home, and all witches are free people here. As long as they don't endanger anyone, I won't stop them." And she exhaled. It's not a bad thing to let them go to the Western region. Not a bad thing? Ashes was puzzled. Have you ever wondered why the Bloodfang Association was no different from other witches in the beginning, but now it's gradually becoming obvious? She thought for a while. Because you've settled down? That's right, Tilly nodded and said, previously, the church was like a mountain pressing down on everyone's hearts. In order to survive, everyone had to stick close to each other. But now that the churches in the Fjord Islands had been eradicated, Sleeping Island had gained a more relaxed environment. People's hearts naturally began to waver, which was a normal phenomenon. We are different from the Witch Cooperation Association. We are a combination of many witch organizations, so blindly suppressing them will not work. If we want to work together like we did in the beginning, we need a strong enemy. Ashes frowned. You mean the devil? The enemy in the depths of the fertile plains, the fiasco of the Union, the upcoming third battle of divine will. It's much more effective for them to understand these things in person than for me to tell them. Tilly smiled. And in Border Town, they can see far more than these. Princess Tilly stood up, walked to the door leading to the back garden from the study, and pushed the door open. They'll see that non-combat witches can also play an irreplaceable role, that ordinary people have the ability to compete with witches, and that when all witches unite, they'll see an amazing effect. Just like this door. After you push it open, you'll see a wider world. Ashes quietly looked at the woman bathed in the sun and could not say a word. Her gray hair reflected a dazzling luster and fluttered with the sea breeze. Even her back was indescribably beautiful. Time seemed to freeze here, and in this narrow study, only she and herself were left. After a long time, Tilly turned around and smiled slyly. And I have special reasons for choosing Iffy and Soft Feathers. Roland should be able to understand my thoughts. Anna pushed Roland, who was beside her. It's time to get up. Wait a little longer. Roland leaned sideways and pulled her into his arms, smelling the delicate fragrance coming from her hair. After returning to Neverwinter from King's City, he spent the whole night with Anna. The short separation made the reunion particularly passionate, and the result was that both of them could not get up the next morning. Anna was absent from the magic power practice that day. It was not that she did not want to go, but Roland did not let her go. Of course, in the face of his request, Anna did not show any intention to refuse. From noon to evening, the air was filled with a lingering smell. When they rested, they sat on the bed and talked about what happened in the past few days. Even their lunch was sent to the room by the maid. Of course, at this time, Anna would shrink into the quilt and look down. She could see a pair of sapphire-like eyes shining brightly on his chest. Caressing the other party's smooth back, Anna couldn't help but let out a kitten-like hum. Even though after a year of growth, she was no longer that thin and weak girl in the prison, but when she curled up her body, she could still fit perfectly in his arms. He kissed her earlobe from behind. Seeing her cheeks slowly turning red and her eyelashes slightly trembling, it was extremely cute. After a while, she pushed Roland away again. Vendi and the others should be back soon. This time there are new witches, you have to wash up. Anna turned around and said seriously, face to face with him. Okay, Roland responded softly. He knew he could not delay this time. He kissed her lips, turned over, and got up from the bed. He helped Anna put on her clothes and then put on his coat. The basin of water on the table had cooled down, but this was not a problem for Anna. A wisp of black fire jumped into the water, and in the blink of an eye, it was steaming. After washing up, Roland first sent her back to her bedroom, and then returned to the office on the 3rd floor. At least before the witches came back, he could pretend to work seriously. A quarter of an hour later, Lightning and Maggie rushed into the room through the open French window. "Your Majesty, they're here. I didn't expect you to become the king of Grey Castle in just a month." Breeze was the first to walk into the castle hall, followed by 4 witches. Lotus and Honey were familiar, but it was the first time Roland saw the other 2 witches. If Vendi didn't tell me, I wouldn't have believed it. If Tilly knew, she would be very surprised. Roland greeted them with a smile. "I didn't hold a coronation ceremony, so it's okay to call me the way I used to." "But you are already a fully deserving king," Breeze said as he bowed. Lotus and Honey also followed suit, bowing in an exaggerated manner, and then the 2 of them simply put their hands on their chests to show their respect. The expressions of the 4 people were also completely different. On one side they were filled with the joy of reunion, on the other side they were vigilant. Roland was a little surprised. Chapter 5:34. After the banquet, Roland called Lotus and Vendi into his office. "Is everything okay on Sleeping Island?" he asked Lotus with a smile. "I hope I didn't cause you any trouble during the time I occupied Tilly's place." "No," Lotus nodded and then said in a low voice, "Yes. By the way, I haven't thanked you for the scarf you gave me last time." "Don't be so formal." Roland waved his hand. He knew that after a period of time, the familiarity they had established would become a lot more distant. But this did not mean that the connection between them had disappeared. Instead, it was temporary. As long as they maintained their previous attitude, he believed that they would soon be able to reintegrate. "It seems that a lot has changed here, but in fact, it's not much different from when you left. Just treat Neverwinter as your home." "That's right." Vendi touched her head and said, "You're still our sister." Lotus seemed to be a little embarrassed and lowered her head, but her tone was obviously relaxed. "After you arrived at the castle, I've been very concerned about one thing. Aren't those 2 witches named Iffy and Softfeathers the witches of Sleeping Island?" Roland changed the topic. He noticed that whether it was the introduction or the reminiscence of the past, the 2 of them didn't fit in with the other witches. Although they would also chat a few words during the meal, compared to Lotus, Sylvie, Evelyn, Candle and the others' warm embrace, the difference was relatively obvious. And he did not know whether it was an illusion or not, but he always felt that Evelyn and Candle were a little afraid of those 2 witches. "No, they're indeed from Sleeping Island, but they're a little different from us." Lotus briefly explained the origin of the 2 witches. "I don't know why Lady Tilly sent the witches of the Bloodfang Association here. Iffy is a combat witch." Roland was stunned. "Yes, she can summon a magic cage to capture enemies who are much stronger than her. Even Lady Ashes can't escape once she's trapped if she doesn't wear a god's stone of retaliation." "What about Softfeathers?" Vendi asked curiously. "Although she's not a combat witch, her ability is still very powerful," Lotus muttered. "Any object that comes into contact with her can become sticky, and once it sticks together, it can't be separated until her ability fails. But according to her, as long as enough magic power is used, the stickiness can last for a long time." "This ability should have a wide range of uses," Roland said in surprise. "Why did that witch from the kingdom of Wolfheart agree to send such witches here?" "The members of the Bloodfang Association are all very powerful. Not to mention that there are many combat witches. The rest of the non-combat witches also have outstanding abilities. Most of the credit goes to them for the construction of Sleeping Island." Lotus sighed, looking very reluctant to admit this, but they always feel that they are a cut above others, and often bully those witches with inferior abilities. If Lady Tilly hadn't tried her best to stop them, I'm afraid that the number of witches going to the fjords would have decreased by more than half. So that's how it is, he thought. This was probably the reason why Evelyn and Candle had such an unusual expression in front of them. "I see. Have a good rest today." Roland comforted Lotus and then looked at Vendi. I'll leave the arrangement of their rooms to you. Let the witches of the Bloodfang Association live a little further away for the time being. We'll have a detailed ability test tomorrow. Yes, Your Majesty, Vendi answered with her hand on her chest. After the two of them left, Nightingale appeared beside him and asked with a piece of fish in her mouth, "Don't you need someone to keep an eye on those two guys? Since they haven't left Sleeping Island, there shouldn't be too much of a problem." Roland shrugged. The witches who go to the fjords aren't like the Witch Cooperation Association, who have experienced life and death together. Plus, the witches themselves are a combination of many witch organizations, so it's not surprising that such a situation would occur. As the saying goes, there are all kinds of strange things within a party. Once the witch union expanded, it would be the same sooner or later. However, the factional competition within the party was not all harmful. As long as it was a healthy competition, it would increase the vitality of the union. The only thing I don't understand is why Tilly sent the combat witches here. If she just wanted me to discipline them, she could have sent the assistant witches, not to mention that Breeze is on Tilly's side. Maybe she wrote the reason in the letter? Nightingale guessed. I almost forgot. Roland patted his head, took out the envelope from the drawer, and spread it on the table. In addition to the 5 witches, Tilly also brought a thick stack of ancient books and a handwritten letter. Because of the banquet, he had not had time to read them. In the letter, Tilly talked about the origin of the books and the strangeness of their contents, followed by her conjecture about the ceiling and her hope that he could help Thunder build a ship that could go against the current. In the second half, Roland had heard from Thunder himself, but the first half surprised him. Books from different times and places were gathered together and stuffed into the ruins. Some of the contents of the books had even disappeared from the Union for nearly 100 years. This meant that the underwater ruins were still visited by people more than 300 years ago. Who were these people? The back of the letter briefly mentioned the new witch's abilities. What concerned Roland the most was the paragraph at the end. Our understanding of the world is still in the stage of ignorance, even worse than that of the Union more than 400 years ago. If you want to defeat the enemy, you must first understand the enemy. At this point, their abilities may be able to help you. After reading the letter, he could not help but be lost in thought. Understand the enemy. Help. What does Tilly want to say? Roland shifted his gaze back to the introduction of the abilities. Suddenly, a shocking idea leaped into his mind. Does Tilly want to? No, that's too bold. He quickly shook his head, but as soon as the idea emerged, it grew uncontrollably and wildly. There was indeed a risk, but the reward was also extremely considerable. Just thinking about the boxes of magic stones left by Agatha was enough to make people excited. If they could be combined into a sigil and used, the significance would be no less than a steam engine. It was not that he had not thought about this before, but the actual operation was very difficult, so he had finally given up. Now that he had the abilities of Iffy and Breeze, it seemed that his goal was not so far away. What does the letter say? As if noticing his strange look, Nightingale bent down and reached out to touch his forehead. Hey, are you okay? Very bad. My heart is about to jump out of my chest. Roland smiled helplessly. But Tilly didn't even tell me the reason and just threw the choice to me. She asked curiously, choose what? Chapter 5:35. The next morning, Roland took the witches to the north of the outer city wall, near the misty forest. Apart from Breeze, Iffy, and Soft Feathers, Nightingale, Vendi, Carter, Iron Axe, and the others also accompanied them. The first army had sealed off the grassland nearby, while Leaf was in charge of guarding the forest. The first to be tested was Soft Feathers. She had long brown-red hair and neat bangs that just covered her eyebrows. She seemed to be about the same height as Honey, at most 1.2 or 1.3 meters tall. She was also not very old, just over 16 years old, but she had already been awakened for 4 years, which was very early for witches. Because she had gone through the magic bite 4 times, the magic power in her body was higher than most of the young witches, almost half of what Anna had when she was an adult. This made it easy for Soft Feathers to release her ability, and her control of the binding effect was also very precise. She could turn an object into a very sticky gel, or she could affect only one side or a single point. This ability consumed very little magic power, and during the test, Nightingale could hardly see any changes in the magic power. "Have you ever tested how long the binding effect can last?" Roland asked. "If I just stick 2 stones together and use all my magic power, it should be able to last for decades," she said, spreading her hands. "But I haven't actually tested it. This is just my speculation based on the consumption of magic power." "Then what's the biggest thing you've ever glued?" "The sea wall." Softfeather's careless face finally showed a trace of pride. During a high tide, there was a crack as thick as an arm on the wall of Sleeping Island, but Lotus wasn't on the island at that time. "I turned the whole crack into a glue and stuffed it with linen and stones to block the seawater. Otherwise, that part of the wall wouldn't have lasted until the next high tide." For some reason, when she said this, Roland always felt like praising him. "Yes," he nodded. After getting the affirmation, Softfeathers returned to her previous calm expression. Judging from her words and actions, she did not look like a child who had not reached adulthood at all. It seemed that she had experienced something that made it hard for her to show her emotions. This made Roland sigh. What kind of life did the witches of the Bloodfang Association lead before they went to Sleeping Island? The next tester was Breeze. She gracefully saluted. "The last time I came to the Western region, I didn't have a chance to stay, and I regretted it for a long time. This time, I can finally stay in your territory for a while. If you need my ability, please let me know." Roland replied with a smile, "Then you should enjoy your life in Neverwinter and make up for the regret you had last time." "You're welcome. If you have any requests, you can tell Vendi." Yifeng was slightly older than Nightingale, around 25 years old. Just like her name, she gave off a pleasant feeling. Even so, she was still an out-and-out combat witch. Her ability was to control the field. Anyone who came within 5 meters of her would involuntarily act according to her will. This ability could not defend against long-range attacks, nor was it useful against crossbows and spears. However, it was almost invincible against enemies who could only fight at close range. As a summoning ability, it was also affected by the God's Stone of Retaliation. It consumed a medium amount of magic power and could be used more than 10 times a day. During this period, Breeze could move as usual. In addition, the field could not be seen by the naked eye, so it was impossible to guard against a surprise attack. As long as she found a chance to break into the 5-meter range, she could control the life and death of her opponent. Obviously, this was an excellent ability to observe demons at close range. The last witch to be tested was Iffy. She looked to be in her 20s at most. She was wearing a close-fitting black leather coat and knee-high boots, which made her look very thin. Her long chestnut-colored hair reached her waist, and it shone with a golden light under the sun. Iffy's ability was also the core of capturing demons, although she did not know why Tilly had chosen her to come to the Western region. The magic cage could trap an enemy who was close to her in an instant. She could also contract the cage to cause fatal damage to the enemy. Moreover, for her, the prey in the cage had no weight. In other words, even if she captured an elephant, she could easily drag it back to Neverwinter. How big are the targets you can capture? Since the characteristics of the magic cage were related to the success or failure of the plan, Roland asked very carefully. "It's related to magic power." She shrugged and said, "But even the whales in the sea can't escape from my palm." "How many can you trap at the same time?" "2. She stretched out her hands. "I only have 1 pair of hands, Your Majesty. Can't you break free?" "That's right. As long as I don't let go, Ashes can't get out of the cage." "Well." Just when Roland was thinking about what else he should ask, Iffy took the initiative and said, "Why don't you find someone to have a try? I think Maggie is very suitable. I heard that her ability has evolved and the monster she turned into yesterday looked quite strong. If even she can't break free, you don't have to worry about it." This is a good idea, Roland thought to himself. After all, Maggie's original form was the demon's mount. If they really wanted to capture demons, it was likely that they would encounter the same enemy. After thinking for a moment, he nodded to Nightingale and said, "Go tell Leaf to call Maggie here." If there was no patrol mission, Maggie and Lightning always flew along the misty forest and were almost inseparable. Now that they had Leaf, the forest had become their backyard. Fragrant bird beak mushrooms were everywhere, and there was a nest specially built for them to dig out the eggs. As a result, Maggie's pigeon transformation was comparable to that of a bald eagle. Of course, after the transformation, her original body was still that little girl with long white hair. Not long after, the two figures appeared in the sky. "Maggie is here, Coo." She landed on the prince's head as usual. "What's the matter?" Roland briefly explained his plan for the test. "You turn into a giant bird with fleshy wings and see if you can break free from the magic cage." "Got it, Coo." Maggie flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, a huge monster appeared in front of them, its shadow blocking the sun. Roland always felt that the giant beast now was much bigger than when she first evolved. "Let's start," he said to Iffy. The latter chuckled, and a trace of sarcasm flashed in her eyes. She stretched out her right hand and spread her 5 fingers. Dozens of shining purple silk threads suddenly appeared on top of Maggie's head. In the blink of an eye, they closed into a ball and covered her whole body. The cage did not look thick, but no matter how much she bit or scratched, it could not be deformed. Iffy's movements were also very relaxed, as if maintaining the cage did not require much strength from her. Even if another demon joined in, she should be able to capture it together. Just when Roland was about to ask her to stop her ability, Iffy suddenly clenched her right hand into a fist. Chapter 5:36. What are you doing? Let her go. Several voices rang out at the same time. Iffy curled her lips and raised her right hand. The cage suddenly disappeared and Maggie fell to the ground. "You bastard!" A golden figure soared into the air and rushed toward her. It was Lightning. However, the moment the little girl raised her fist, she was trapped by the magic cage. The distance between them was less than an arm's length, but she could not touch her. "Get out of here. It's none of your business." Iffy threw the cage away unhappily. Lightning followed the cage and rolled a few times on the ground until she was out of the range of Iffy's ability. Only then did she get out of the cage. Lightning wiped the dust off her face. When she was about to rush over again, she saw Roland walking in front of Iffy and raising his hand. Bang! Following the crisp sound, everyone froze on the spot. Iffy was especially surprised. She did not cover her blushing cheeks but raised her head to look at Roland as if she could not understand what he was doing. After a while, she slowly knelt on one knee and said, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." Roland was also a little surprised. He did not want to hurt a woman, but when he saw Maggie fall to the ground, he did not even think much and moved his body automatically. Now that he thought about it, he felt as if he had seen his own daughter being bullied by some naughty kid. Anger filled his heart. "What do you mean?" he asked loudly. "Your Majesty, the power that a person can unleash in times of crisis is far greater than usual. I just wanted the test result to be more accurate." Iffy's tone was extremely calm, as if it was a trivial matter. Now it seems that the advanced non-combat witches are just SOSO. The evolution of their abilities still can't make up for the gap between them. Roland could not help but be speechless. What kind of environment did this person live in that she felt it was reasonable to hurt a fellow witch in order to test her ability? "How's Maggie?" He looked at Vendy, who had returned to her original form with the white-haired girl in her arms. "I'm fine. I didn't suffer too much damage. It's just a little red and swollen." Vendy frowned and lifted her sleeves. The red marks left by the cage could clearly be seen on her fair arms. "Coo." Maggie buried her head in Vendy's arms and sounded wronged. "Don't worry, Your Majesty," Iffy said disapprovingly. "I know the strength of the contraction. This kind of small injury will heal itself in a day or two for a witch. Apologize to her." Roland angrily interrupted. The latter opened his mouth and looked at him in surprise. His face instantly turned red. "Sorry, Your Majesty, it's not me. It's Maggie." This time, she gritted her teeth and lowered her head, not making a sound. Looking at Iffy's absolutely unapologetic expression, Roland was so angry that he almost laughed. It seemed that the atmosphere on Sleeping Island might be worse than he had imagined. If the people of the Bloodfang Association behaved like this in the territory of a secular lord, there would be all kinds of dissatisfaction in Sleeping Island, which was dominated by witches. Most importantly, Iffy thought that there was nothing wrong with what she had done. If it was just a simple punishment, Roland could think of countless ways to make her suffer, but it would not help to change her view of the world. Thinking of the reason why Tilly had sent them here, he could not help but sigh. Since she had previously boasted that if she had any difficulties, she could come to me. At this time, he naturally could not just toss her back and be done with it. If he could not help Tilly to calm down the conflicts in the rear, Sleeping Island would fall apart sooner or later. Of course, he might be able to attract some witches, but he would also lose Tilly's trust forever. Only by destroying what Iffy was proud of from the bottom of her heart could she truly realize her mistake. You think you can ignore the feelings of the weak just because you're stronger than others? Roland's voice gradually became cold. In fact, you're the real weak one. His words made Iffy react instantly. Iffy suddenly raised her head with a look of dissatisfaction on her face. You think that combat witches should be superior to assistant witches because when facing enemies, combat witches are the core to ensure the continuity of the group, right? Roland continued. This idea is pitiful and ridiculous. If you really fight, you'll have no chance of winning since you rely too much on your own ability. Iffy frowned and a dangerous light flashed in her eyes. Your Majesty, are you trying to say that non-combat witches can also defeat me? You don't believe me? Roland sneered. Most of the witches in the Witch Union can do it easily, even if they've never used their ability to fight. Speaking of this, he looked at Lightning. She was stunned at first, but soon understood what he meant and nodded imperceptibly. That's just your imagination. Then let Maggie have a serious fight with you, Roland said in a deep voice. She'll tell you personally that you're not qualified to be superior to any other witch. What? Iffy's eyes widened. You mean, with that stupid pigeon? The duel will be held tomorrow, Roland said word by word. At that time, you'll naturally understand that you're not as powerful as you think. When they returned to their room, lunch was already laid out on the table in the living room. The plates were filled with broth, bread, mushrooms, and stewed vegetables. Obviously, they did not have to eat in the hall today. There's meat and bread? Soft Feathers said in surprise. I thought I could only drink cold water to satisfy my hunger today. He doesn't want me to go to the duel with an empty stomach. Iffy sneered. He really trusts that stupid bird. Of course, there might be drugs in it, such as the kind that makes people have diarrhea. Iffy nonchalantly grabbed a piece of bread and stuffed it into her mouth. You can choose not to eat it. I'm not the duel. Soft Feathers rolled her eyes, climbed up the stool, and dragged a plate of roasted mushrooms in front of her. By the way, is it really necessary for you to do this? Lady Heidi asked us to confirm the situation here, but she didn't ask you to make trouble in front of the Lord, right? This is a rare opportunity. Really? She said with great interest. Not for any other reason? Iffy tilted her head and stared coldly at Soft Feathers until the latter withdrew her head. Well, forget I asked. Since the witches who went to the western region returned to Sleeping Island, the atmosphere on the island had become increasingly unfavorable to the Bloodfang Association. It was said that Lady Tilly's elder brother had established a territory across the sea for witches to take shelter in, and that he was especially kind to non-combat witches who didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. This caused the incompetent witches on the island to become more and more influential. Lady Heidi suspected that this was deliberately fabricated by Tilly to win over most of her supporters. After all, according to common sense, the witches who could fight for the Lord and seize land and power should be valued more. However, the result of today's test greatly surprised her. This secular lord seemed to treat all witches equally. But this was not the most surprising thing to her. The most surprising thing was Maggie. She had never expected that the silly girl, who could not even speak a complete sentence, would be loved by so many witches, including the Lord. When she appeared in front of everyone, they all smiled from the bottom of their hearts. But on Sleeping Island, she was just a dispensable pet. It was this feeling that made Iffy feel endless jealousy and anger. She left Sleeping Island, but here she was fighting with other witches? This was a betrayal. This was the real reason why Iffy decided to teach her a lesson. However, what happened next made her unable to come back to her senses at all. Dueling with a pigeon? How could His Majesty say such a ridiculous thing? But this was good. Finding out the real situation in the Western region was one of her tasks, and the other was to show her value and attract the attention of the Lord. Chapter 537. It was already dusk when Roland returned to the castle after arranging the duel. Is Maggie really okay? Nightingale appeared behind him as soon as he stepped into the office. She's been practicing her marksmanship with Lightning, and Lightning is your disciple. There's nothing to worry about. Roland comforted her. She dared to transform into a strange beast and pounced on the demons at the critical moment of exploring Devil's Town, which proves that she doesn't lack courage. The only problem is whether she will shoot at her own kind. Maggie was more frightened than hurt at that time. Iffy did not mean to kill her, but her extremely contemptuous attitude towards non-combat witches was like a bomb in the team. Roland did not dare to take her out to catch demons if he did not teach her a memorable lesson and make her repent. The best way to teach her a lesson was to let Maggie defeat Iffy herself. There was no doubt that the only weapon that could surpass the ability limit and make the assistant witches have the power to fight was the gun. In order to avoid accidental death, Roland specially asked Soroya to make a batch of rubber bullets. The metal bullets were replaced with layers of coating, which gradually softened from the inside to the outside. This kind of bullet could not penetrate the human body, but its power should not be underestimated. The huge kinetic energy would be transmitted to the human body along with the deformation of the bullet, and the resulting severe pain was enough to make the target lose the ability to resist, so it was also called the energy-fading bullet. I'll go see her again. Nightingale seemed to be worried and disappeared into the mist. Roland gently exhaled. When Iffy attacked Maggie, he clearly heard the click of the gun's safety being removed. If Iffy did not let go of Maggie as she was told, he was afraid that he would have to call Nana over. In addition, he could see that Maggie was quite afraid of the witches of the Bloodfang Association, which meant that they had done a lot of similar things on Sleeping Island. Thinking of the former Witch Cooperation Association's halakha, then thinking of Evelyn and Candle's inferiority complex when they first came here, and even the Witch Union more than 400 years ago, this idea that combat witches were more noble was undoubtedly not a sudden one. It could be said that in the face of external oppression, those who had the ability to fight would definitely have a higher right to speak. Unfortunately, the power of gunpowder and guns was enough to make up for the difference in ability. He thought that if he could correct these two people, Tilly would probably trust him even more. Don't worry too much. Just aim at the guy and empty the magazine. Make her cry and beg for mercy. Do you understand? Lightning shouted, even if it's a normal bullet, Nana is watching from behind. What's more, you're using the paint bullet made by Sister Soroya. If you don't hit her a few more times, you won't be able to vent your anger. Maggie leaned against the headboard, her hair covering her cheeks. I see. You don't know. Lightning brushed aside her long white hair. You're not thinking about beating him up right now, are you? If you let her go this time, I will never take you on an adventure again. Explorers don't need cowards. Maggie looked hesitant. I'm not. She's not a coward. Another voice came from behind them. A coward can't fight with demons, not to mention that she saved my life. Nightingale got out of the mist, walked to the bedside, and flicked Lightning's forehead. How can you talk like that? The little girl covered her forehead and curled her lips. I'm just afraid that she'll get cold feet. She sighed and held Maggie's hand. Listen, this competition is not just between you and her. His Majesty arranged this to make the witches of the Bloodfang Association realize their mistakes and change their attitude towards other witches. Do you remember Evelyn and Candle? There are many witches on Sleeping Island who have similar experiences. If you can teach them a lesson, in a sense, You'll be helping them. Nightingale paused. So, you're not just fighting for yourself, but to protect everyone, just like last time when you fought against demons. Yes. Maggie blinked her eyes and nodded gently. By the way, His Majesty also said that if you win this time, there will be an unlimited supply of ice cream and pepper barbecue for a week, just for you alone. Her eyes suddenly lit up. The next day, in addition to the guards who were responsible for clearing the field, there were more than 10 witches on the meadow outside the city wall. They gathered around Roland and cheered for Maggie loudly. I won't cheer for you. Soft Feathers yawned. You can't hear it anyway. No need. Iffy slowly walked to the center of the field and coldly looked at Maggie, whose body was covered by her long hair. She sneered in her heart. If the number of supporters could win, the church would have unified the whole continent long ago. It's not too late to admit defeat. Otherwise, it's not good to let His Majesty down. I won't lose, Ku. She was slightly stunned. Since when did this guy dare to speak in such a confident tone in front of her? Really? Then you'd better be prepared to be locked in a cage and fall from the sky. You can't lock me up, Maggie said with her head held high. The only person who can catch me in the sky is lightning. As the duel began, Iffy did not waste any time and rushed straight to her opponent. She knew very well that even if Maggie had the God's Stone of Retaliation, she would not be able to defeat her, who had received combat training. His Majesty was wrong about one thing. Combat witches did not only rely on their own abilities to fight, but also their bodies were also deadly weapons. With their extraordinary physical fitness and recovery ability, witches could often withstand more bloody and harsh training. Even if her opponent was a fully armed knight, she was confident that she could defeat him within 10 breaths. Maggie, on the other hand, transformed into a blue bird, quickly spread her wings and flew towards the sky. Is this your way of fighting? Iffy stretched out her arms in the direction of her escape, but the burst of magic power did not capture the target. This is a duel. Where can you escape to? Chirp, chirp. The bird rose higher and higher and soon disappeared, leaving only a string of crisp chirps. Iffy frowned and looked up at the sky. Suddenly, she saw a faint shadow in the direction of the rising sun. Was she using the light to hide herself and launch an unexpected attack? Iffy could not help but sneer. It was a good idea. Unfortunately, her ability did not require her to see the target directly. Even if she was blindfolded, any target within 10 steps of her would be detected by her magic power. This was the branch ability that she had awakened when she became an adult. Moreover, what harm could a fist-sized blue bird do to her? To determine the winner, her opponent would inevitably transform into that ferocious giant again. Just as she was waiting, a cloud covered the sun and the earth instantly darkened. At that moment, Iffy saw the bird falling from the sky. Poor thing, it seems that even luck is not on your side. Without hesitation, she stretched out her hands to grab her opponent. The winner had been decided. But there was nothing. Magic power surrounded the front of her, but she did not feel Maggie crashing into her. Maggie abruptly stopped 20 paces away from her. Then, to Iffy's surprise, she transformed back into a human in midair and took out a silver short stick from her waist pocket. Was she crazy? Without the bird's wings, Maggie did not fall straight to the ground. Her long white hair rose up and spread out like wings, supporting her to fall slowly. At the same time, the short stick spurted out a ball of sparks and a loud noise. Iffy felt that something had entered the range of her magic power, but it was not Maggie herself, nor was it a crossbow or a stone. She did not even have time to release the cage before she felt her abdomen being hit by a hammer, followed by her thighs and calves. There was a series of explosive sounds and the soil on the ground was splashed. The severe pain made her unable to make any sound, as if her broken legs could no longer support her body. Iffy fell to the ground, clutching her stomach and curling up into a ball. Her consciousness was blurred. Vaguely, she saw a white figure falling in front of her. She used the last of her strength to raise her trembling hand, but her magic no longer responded to her call. You lost, Ku. Chapter 5:38 Annie, I'm tired. Hold on a little longer. We're almost there. There was hard gravel under her feet. Every step she took caused her heart to ache. Ify really wanted to stop, but Annie held her hand tightly and pulled her forward. Whether it was passing through the thorny shrubs or the bone-chilling stream, Annie's pace did not slow down at all. From behind, her figure was as firm as a mountain. Annie, I'm really tired. Ify begged again. Her feet felt like they were on fire, and her whole body was in pain. No matter how she inhaled, she felt suffocated in her chest. She thought she was going to die. Annie let out a sigh and listened to the ground for a while. Then she pointed to a protruding stone not far away. Let's rest there. Hearing that they could rest, the last bit of strength rose from the bottom of her heart. She gritted her teeth and walked quickly to the giant stone. Then she collapsed. At this moment, she even wanted to stay here forever. Annie did not sit down immediately. She found a few broken treetops around and surrounded the stone on both sides, so that they could block part of the view. The protruding stone was like a natural roof. Now that there were branches on both sides, it looked more like a nest. Unfortunately, the ground was still bumpy and painful, and the narrow space was not enough for two people to lie down. The church won't chase us. We've already escaped so far. We can't let our guard down. This distance is not safe for us. Annie was as vigilant as a wild cat. She always pricked up her ears and monitored everything around her. However, she was much tougher than a wild cat. She was used to pain. Compared to the cruel Judgment Army, Annie was actually more like a silent predator, if she had a weapon. Does the Bloodfang Association really exist? They were not the only ones looking for the witches of the Bloodfang Association. However, after leaving Greystone's stronghold, they were intercepted by the church, so the 5 witches had to split up. Ify walked eastward for 3 days and 3 nights before she met Annie, but there was no news from the others. Of course, Annie said while rubbing her toes. I heard they're on the Wolffang Island across the sea. But how can we cross the sea? Just walk to the seaside and find a ferry, Annie comforted her. Don't worry. Leave everything to me. Yes, Ify answered in a low voice. She took out a piece of dried meat skin from her bag and covered it with both hands. Soon, white smoke rose from the skin and it became hot and soft. Let's eat something first. We'll continue our journey after that. This was Annie's ability. Her palms could ignite branches and wooden sticks, and she could also roast food. Ify gobbled up the piece of meat and swallowed it. She stared at the piece of meat in Annie's hand, drooling. Annie smiled, bit off half of it and threw it to her. You can eat more. I'm not that hungry. After finishing this section, he even sucked on the fingers one by one. Then, it was time for him to continue on his journey. Ify struggled to get up from the ground. Before she could get out of the rock, the dead leaves on the branches suddenly trembled. It was not the swaying of the autumn wind, but a slight and rapid tremor, as if something was approaching. Annie's pupils dilated. It's a horse. They were riding over. Ify felt herself being pulled up. She subconsciously ran a few steps, but the pain in her feet instantly returned to her whole body. Her body had not recovered at all. It was difficult for her to just stand, let alone run. She looked back and saw a dozen galloping horses at the end of the rocky beach. The pursuers were not fast, probably for fear that their horses would break their hooves. But it was enough for the 2 of them who were running for their lives barefoot. They could not run away. Or rather, they could not run away. Ify broke free from Annie's hand. You go first. I'll carry you. You can't run fast like that. Listen to me. Come on. While she was hesitating, the Judgment Army on their tall horses was getting closer. Ify saw some of them raising their crossbows and throwing spears. At this moment, the bumpy gravel ground suddenly collapsed. The enemy in front of them screamed and fell into the deep pit. The team hurriedly dispersed to both sides, but unexpectedly, the horses all knelt on the ground. A group of figures in blood-red robes appeared in front of the church's pursuers without any warning, as if they had emerged from the ground. The Judgment Army was caught off guard by the crossbows at close range. The enemies who were lucky enough to escape the crossbows could not escape the ambush. In a short while, More than 10 of the church's pursuers were all killed on the rocky beach. Then they quickly stripped them of their armor, food, and bags, even the god's stone of retaliation. One of them walked in front of them. "Are you looking for the Bloodfang Association? How did you know?" Iffy was surprised. "Yes, Your Excellency." Annie pinched her hand eagerly. "We're all witches. There are 3 others who got separated on the way. Can you help them? We don't have enough manpower to take care of other witches." The newcomer took off her hood, revealing her short red hair. "If your companions can't rely on their own strength to get here, they're not qualified to join the Bloodfang Association." She paused for a moment. Of course, not everyone who gets here can join the Bloodfang Association. Iffy felt Annie's hand tighten. "What are your abilities? Show me one time." After the 2 of them performed their abilities, the red-haired woman nodded at Iffy. "You can go to Archduke Island." She then said to Annie, "But you can't." "But, Your Excellency, I'll send someone to send you to other witch organizations, but not the Bloodfang Association." The woman's tone was unquestionable. "You can't become a combat witch, and the Bloodfang Association doesn't need a cook." "What's there to cry about?" The red-haired woman scolded impatiently. "You'll look like this when you see Master later. She'll definitely teach you a lesson. I want to be with Annie." "You're a good-for-nothing kid. She's just a burden." "She's not. She saved me." Iffy swallowed her snot. "Annie is the combat witch you need." "Whether you're a combat witch or not depends on your ability at the time of awakening, not your strong limbs," the woman said disdainfully. "You think she's powerful because she's 5 or 6 years older than you. In fact, your potential is far greater than hers. Then, where will you send Annie?" "It's none of your business." Iffy's nose felt sour again. The red-haired woman frowned. "Listen, Master doesn't like weak people. If you want to survive on Archduke Island, don't mention the past." Chapter 539. In the deep underground cave, everyone knelt down to worship a woman in gorgeous clothes. Countless candles were burning quietly, like stars covering the ground. "Is this the new kid? Raise your head and let me see." Iffy raised her head timidly, but all she saw was a mask reflecting a cold light. At that moment, she really wanted to scream. "My name is Heidi Morgan. Don't be afraid. This mask is just to make it easier for me to come and go." The voice was softer than she imagined. "From today on, you are a member of the Bloodfang Association." "Why? Why can't you accept Annie?" Iffy gathered her courage and asked. "How dare you?" the red-haired woman shouted. The other witches also chuckled, as if they were mocking her stupidity. "It's okay." Heidi waved her hand, walked down the platform and came to her. "Because I can't feed so many witches. She can find her own food. Like a mouse, lying in the gutter all day and begging for leftovers? Living like this day after day will wear away all your wildness." Heidi shook her head. "The Bloodfang Association needs wild beasts, not mice waiting to be slaughtered." "Wild beasts?" Iffy could not help repeating. "Yes, have you ever seen a rock wolf?" She shook her head. "They are the symbol of the kingdom of Wolfheart, and also the masters of the mountain cliffs. They can give birth to 3 to 4 cubs in a litter, but not all of them can survive. Do you know why?" Heidi said slowly, "Because the mother wolf will kill the cubs that can't be fed according to the hunting situation. In this way, the rest of the cubs can get enough food, so that the offspring can survive in the harsh environment of the cliffs." Iffy opened her mouth, but did not know what to say. If the feeding of each cub is reduced, they can survive, but only survive. Without enough nutrition, the cubs can't hunt when they grow up. They are no different from trash. They can't step out of the nest, let alone have a chance to reproduce. In the long run, the rock wolf group will disappear completely. What did you think of? Heidi lifted her chin. "Child, this is what God has told us. Witches must be like beasts in order to survive the cruel oppression. And the powerful combat witches are naturally the representatives of the entire race, such as you now." The candlelight swayed. Iffy did not hear the cheers, but she felt the invisible force behind her like a tide. It was mixed with the witch's emotions of excitement, exhilaration, and joy, like a silent volcano. After a while, she hesitantly asked, "Then, what if there is enough food for every wolf pup?" "Then they are not wolves," Heidi smiled, "but dogs." The whip cracked against her back, making a crisp sound. "Idiot, you can't even complete such a small amount of training. You ate so much food for nothing. Tell me, how many lashes is this?" 24, Iffy said through gritted teeth. What answered her was the next lash. Blood and sweat flowed down her back and wet her pants. "That's it for today. If the training tomorrow is still like this, the whipping will be doubled." The red-haired woman threw a large piece of steak in the middle of the 4 witches who were being punished. "Dinner time is over. I asked Lady Heidi for this extra steak. You guys divide it among yourselves. Remember, no magic power is allowed." The amount of steak was enough to fill the stomachs of the 4 witches. However, the combat training consumed a lot of energy. If they could get more food as a supplement between meals, the possibility of completing the training would be higher. Like beasts, only the strong witches could survive. Iffy glanced at the steak and pounced on the witch closest to her. The secret association was destroyed by the church. I heard that no one could escape. The witch's hand too. The church has set up a camp on the East Coast. Those damn nobles. Heidi's face was very ugly. "I'll tear them into pieces sooner or later." The witch forces in the kingdom of Wolfheart were destroyed one by one. Only the Bloodfang Association was still struggling. Although Iffy did not understand what it had to do with the nobles on the island, she could sense that the situation was very dangerous. "In that case, let me and Sharji get rid of them." "It's too late. The church has noticed the Archduke Island. We can't stay here any longer," Heidi said through gritted teeth. "Let's go to Sleeping Island." "You mean the witch organization that sent the pigeon to deliver the letter last time?" Iffy asked. "Yes, we can recruit people from there to strengthen the Bloodfang Association. Besides, all this is just temporary. I'll come back here sooner or later. The kingdom of Wolfheart is mine." "Damn it, why are these people willing to follow the orders of a little girl?" Heidi smashed the glass on the ground. Iffy was silent. In her eyes, most of the witches on the island were just lambs who could not defend themselves against strong enemies. The so-called leader Tilly Wimbledon was the same. If she did not have an extraordinary by her side, she would not be able to hold her position. Maybe it's because she preaches that non-combat witches are equally important? Sharji interrupted. "No one wants to be excluded." "Ridiculous. She doesn't even think about who took down the Fjord's church. How can anyone believe such nonsense?" "Tilly's brother, the Lord of the Western region, seems to think so too. That's all made up by them. No one knows better than me what a lord likes." Heidi flew into a rage. "Do you think I established the Bloodfang Association for?" She suddenly stopped. "No, I can't let her talk nonsense anymore. You must go to the Western region and expose Tilly's lies. Tell him my words. I can give more than what Tilly Wimbledon can give." Iffy did not know why she felt that Lady Heidi did not look like a beast at all. Instead, she looked like an exasperated lamb. "Is this the reason you abandoned me?" Annie's figure suddenly appeared in front of her. "For such a master, for such a ridiculous life, you left me and betrayed my trust in you?" "No, Annie." Iffy was horrified to notice that Annie's face was blank. "Have you forgotten me?" She suddenly opened her eyes. Everything in front of her suddenly disappeared, leaving only the grayish-white ceiling and the hanging chandelier. "Is this a dream?" She quickly closed her eyes and tried to recall Annie's appearance. Fortunately, Annie's appearance was not far away from her. Feeling slightly relieved, Iffy turned over and sat up. She saw a little girl beside the bed looking at her curiously. From the girl's unguarded eyes, Iffy knew that she must be a person who had not experienced hardships and struggles, a so-called lamb. "Who are you?" "Nana," she tilted her head and said, "Did you have a nightmare?" At this moment, Iffy felt that her back was soaked with cold sweat. Did I say anything? Yes, you kept saying that I'm a beast. I'm a beast. The little girl spread out her hands. Why did you say that? You're not a beast. She bit her lip. You don't understand anything. Chapter 540. The First Army completed the follow-up supply work and would soon set off again. This was also the second half of the task of the spring offensive, to seize Willow Town and Fallen Dragon Ridge. The former would unite the entire western region, while the latter would be the most convenient way to the southern region. Considering that neither of the two towns was easy to defend and difficult to attack, Roland handed over the command to Iron Axe and did not go with the team. Since they had just conquered King City, the morale of the army was extremely high. In addition, professional soldiers had gradually formed the embryonic form of a modern army, and they could faithfully carry out combat orders without the Lord leading the army himself. Therefore, Roland was not worried about the result of the battle. As long as they did a good job of reconnaissance and used the artillery unit to steadily advance, the enemy could not make any waves. What he needed to focus on was the reconstruction of the post-war order. Fortunately, Willow Town was not large, so there was no need to set up a fully functional subordinate city hall like the Longsong area. He only needed to arrange corresponding department offices. Now that the border area could provide a group of basic management personnel, it should not be difficult to integrate Willow Town into the political system of Neverwinter. As for Fallen Dragon Ridge, it would be handed over to Countess Spear to manage. After Timothy's downfall, she had sworn allegiance to Roland and agreed to accept the overall management of the western region. In order to help her take over the city and clean up the rebellious nobles, it was necessary to send the First Army to garrison. Moreover, whether it was to further annex the southern region or capture Iron Sand City in the future, Fallen Dragon Ridge was a key transportation route, so another purpose of stationing the army was to prevent accidents. In any case, this city must be under the control of Roland. In this way, the number of the First Army will be tight. After making a plan, Iron Axe frowned and said, "There are currently 500 people in King City, and another 1,000 people in Willow Town and Fallen Dragon Ridge. We can freely mobilize less than 1,500 people, most of whom are artillerymen. I'm afraid that Neverwinter will temporarily lose the ability to take the initiative to attack. How is the training of the new recruits during the months of demons going? Still far from the level of the regular army." He shook his head and said, "At least 2 or 3 more months of training." Roland could not help but laugh. When he first formed the militia to fight against the demonic beasts, it only took him a month and a half of training before he had to bite the bullet and climb the city wall. Now that the army was becoming more and more comprehensive, even the qualification standards had increased a lot. In fact, being able to listen to orders, line up, aim at the target, and pull the trigger was already considered a strong army in this era. After all, lining up to be shot would still require them to advance under the enemy's firepower, and here, they were merely aiming at the enemy for target practice. Don't worry, when the time comes, the garrison can be replaced with these new recruits. Let them fight with the nobles' guards, it can be considered a kind of training. Roland said casually, "When the emissary delegation returns, Neverwinter will welcome a new population peak. At that time, we can continue to expand the size of the army." Conquering King City was far from the end, and seizing Fallen Dragon Ridge was just the beginning. If everything went well, he hoped to incorporate the entire southernmost region into his territory before the months of demons. If he could obtain a stable supply of Blackwater, he might be able to push the industrial level of Neverwinter to a new level. Not long after Iron Axe left, Nightingale quietly appeared in front of Roland. "Iffy wants to see you." Looking at the Witch of the Bloodfang Association slowly walking into the office, Roland felt some changes. Her steps were not as steady as when she first came, and her long black hair was slightly messy. Apparently, she did not take care of it. The vigilance and arrogance on her face faded a little, replaced by a sense of confusion and bewilderment. At this moment, she looked more like a girl of her age. Iffy first bowed to Roland, and after a long silence, she said, Your Majesty, what weapon does Maggie use? Roland had already guessed that she would ask this question. He nodded to Nightingale, who drew out the revolver from her waist and put it on the table. She uses a gun, which uses gunpowder to propel the bullets to kill the enemy. He deftly removed the cartridge and poured out the bullets. The bullets used to kill you have been specially modified, so they won't penetrate your body. Otherwise, you would have been dead. Iffy's lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words at last. Roland picked up a bullet and held it in front of him. Do you see this? It's not much bigger than a little finger, but it requires a set of very complicated steps to produce it. In this process, hundreds of ordinary townspeople and 3 witches are required to participate. Those witches are the non-combat witches that you thought were useless. Do you still think so now? She looked hesitant and did not answer for a long time. Roland did not give her too much time to think and continued, maybe they can't fight you directly with their ability, but what does that mean? An ordinary person can't beat a fierce beast with his fists and feet. But it's still human beings who occupy this world, not those beasts. I prefer to call non-combat witches as auxiliary witches. They can bestow brand new powers to the vast majority of ordinary people through their own abilities, just like guards wielding long swords and shields. With these, humans can easily defeat beasts. In a sense, auxiliary witches are greater than combat witches. But these weapons of yours, they can play a more powerful role in the hands of combat witches, Iffy whispered. This difference is not obvious, at least it can't determine the outcome of a war. Roland shook his head. You can imagine, if you face 10 ordinary soldiers who use the same weapons as you, what are your chances of winning? My territory can produce 7 or 8 of these guns every day, but how many combat witches are there? Moreover, weapons alone are not enough. To maintain the operation of these weapons, we must be equipped with a large production logistics team, in which the role of auxiliary witches is irreplaceable. He reassembled the guns and handed them back to Nightingale. I know it's hard for you to understand this fact at the moment. The reason why human beings are greater than beasts is that they can use their wisdom to create powers that this world has never had. Magic power is undoubtedly the best tool, but you're wasting this talent. He paused for a moment. By the way, in the afternoon, the 1st Army's reserve team will have a live-fire rifle training. I can arrange for you to visit it. At that time, you can use your own eyes to observe what real power is. Times have changed, Iffy. Chapter 541. After a busy day, when Agatha returned to the castle, the sky was already completely dark. Pushing open the door of her residence, she unexpectedly found Vendi waiting for her in the living room. Why are you so busy again? The other side slightly frowned, but there wasn't the slightest hint of blame in her words, only pure concern. In the future, you should come back earlier, at least have dinner with everyone. Sorry, I forgot to look at the sky. Agatha took off her coat and hung it at the door of the room. I was only thinking about making the last batch of nitrogen. I didn't expect that it would already be dark the day after I left. But you have to blame the Lord. When the lights in the chemical plant are on, it's no different from daytime. I brought you dinner, Vendi sighed helplessly. It's on the table, it's still hot, hurry up and eat. Sorry to trouble you, Agatha said, slightly moved. The other side was the most beloved witch of the Witch Cooperation Association, and also deeply trusted by the Lord. If she was in the tequila, she would at least be the executive under the 3 chiefs. Such a person unexpectedly brought her dinner. In the Union, it was absolutely impossible. You're welcome, Vendi patted her shoulder. If you feel tired, remember to ask Echo to sing you a hot spring song. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't forget that you're also a member of the Witch Union. The Witch Union. After closing the door, Agatha was silent for a moment, then went to the table and opened the insulated metal lunchbox. There were 3 dishes and 1 soup in the box. They were the fragrant barbecued steak, fried mushrooms, bread slices, and egg soup. To her surprise, there was a small plate in the corner of the box, half filled with honey. She couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. She didn't expect that Vendi would actually notice this. During the decades when the tequila were fighting against the demons, All kinds of resources were getting more and more scarce, including food. Although Agatha's status was not low, she could only eat a variety of grains and fruits grown by the assistant witches. She also had meat, but the supply was not stable. As for spices, sugar, and honey, they were luxuries that only the higher-ups of the Union could enjoy. As for the latter, even if there were witches who could control bee swarms, they would be used on the battlefield instead of being used to make these dispensable sweets. In fact, she was very fond of sweet things, especially honey. During a barbecue banquet, most people would choose a combination of pepper powder and salt as a dressing, but she quietly brushed a jar of honey clean. He didn't expect that Wendy would see this scene. She suddenly felt something coming from the bottom of her heart. Because she could not feel cold, she was not sensitive to warmth. She rarely used hot water when she took a bath because she did not want to bother Anna. Considering her identity and background, she even asked Roland to arrange a separate room for her, as if she lived alone on the top floor of the laboratory tower. But now, she felt that the room was slightly cold. Perhaps, it was not bad to live with others? Agatha took out the honey, spread it evenly on the bread slices, and slowly put it in her mouth. This time, she really felt the warmth brought by the sweetness. After dinner, she planned to read elementary chemistry for a while before going to bed. The knowledge might not help her advance further, but it would prevent her from being embarrassed in front of mortals. Recently, there was a large group of strangers in the chemical factory. According to paper, they were all from King's City Alchemist Workshop. Every day, Agatha could see them wandering between the laboratory and the factory. Sometimes it was Kyle Sichi who led them, and sometimes it was Kyle's disciple Chavez who led them. But no matter when she saw this group of people, they always had an expression of disbelief on their faces. Everyone's mouth was so wide that one could stuff an egg into it, as if this was the only expression they had. Moreover, a few overly curious fellows seemed to think that she was a famous alchemist. Whenever they had the chance, they would come over and ask her a few questions. At first, they were simple questions, but later on, they became difficult to answer. In order to maintain the dignity of a senior witch and the honor of the Quest Society, Agatha decided to maintain this image. But these days of getting along with them, she once again confirmed that the Union's approach was indeed wrong. Roland had proved the wisdom of nobles, and these ordinary mortals also had wisdom no less than witches. It only took them a few days to master the operation of the nitrogen production equipment, and at the same time, to understand the process of extracting nitrogen. At first, they were still arguing about how many elements were in the air, but now they were discussing what synthetic ammonia was. There were even a few white-haired old men who asked paper questions with smiles on their faces, which scared the hell out of paper. Obviously, they were learning everything about this place at lightning speed. Thinking of this, Agatha could not help but sigh. Witches were neither the favored children of God, nor were they unfortunate people abandoned by God. They were essentially no different from mortals. It was just an inevitable fate. In this battle of divine will, everyone had to bear the corresponding fate, and witches were only a small group of them. She gradually began to believe that without any part of them, humans would not be able to win this battle of fate. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." Agatha turned around and said, "The door is unlocked." A tall blonde woman pushed the door open and came in. She did not pull up her hood, but Agatha felt that she was always shrouded in shadows. "Nightingale. What's the matter?" "His Majesty wants to see you. If he wants to emphasize the theory of balancing work and rest so that I can come back earlier in the future, I already know. I'll be careful in the future." Agatha curled her lips and said, "I won't waste his precious time." "Really?" Nightingale blinked. To be honest, if they were not enemies, Nightingale seemed to be quite easy to talk to. This is only one of the reasons. His Majesty also said that he wants to attack the demons. Agatha was stunned for a moment. What? Then she threw the book in her hand on the table and said, "Take me there." Rushing into the Lord's office, Agatha did not wait for Roland to speak and said anxiously, "You don't even have 10 Longsong cannons now, and you want to attack Devil's Town? Do you think they are as weak as humans?" You only need to kill a few thousand of them, and they will abandon their armor and flee. You will destroy this city and the current good situation. What? Roland looked very surprised. What are you talking about? Don't you want to attack the demons? Chapter 542. Is that all? Hearing this, Agatha was slightly relieved. The strength of the demons lay in their large numbers. 1 or 2 senior witches would be able to deal with a small number of mad demons. Do you have a way to imprison them now? The new witches are perfect for this. Roland explained their abilities. After Iffy captures the demons, the cage can be easily taken away with the balloon. Of course, I'll prepare some handcuffs and shackles, so it won't be a problem to restrain them. What I want to ask is, how long can the red mist last? Can their blood still be used to make sigil after they die? So that's how it is. Agatha now completely understood his purpose. Generally speaking, a can of red mist can last for about a day. The demons will choose the number of red mist canisters to carry according to different tasks. For example, for surveillance and patrol missions, their mounts will carry 3 to 4 canisters. But that's the limit. Roland asked curiously. After leaving the strange Blackrock Tower, the mist will gradually lose its effect, she explained. Otherwise, the Quest Society would have been able to breed demons and beasts of chaos and synthesize a large number of sigil. It's not that the 3 chiefs of the Union haven't tried this before. For example, they took the initiative to occupy some of the demons' outposts in order to seize the small Blackrock Tower. But the demons always destroyed it before they were defeated, leaving only a withered stone tower for the blessed warriors. Withered? Roland was surprised. Can a stone wither? No one knows what it is, but judging from the stones brought back, it's not an exaggeration to say that it's withered. The originally smooth surface has become rough and dull, and a lot of stone chips will fall off when you touch it. It's completely different from what the warriors saw at first. I see. Roland pondered for a moment. If you can really bring the demons back, can you make a sigil of magic stone? Give me enough experimental materials, a laboratory, and 20 common people as assistants. Agatha counted with her fingers. The success rate of a simple sigil is about 80% and an advanced one. Well, you don't have the relevant magic stones anyway. That's not a problem. He hesitated and asked in a low voice, but what if the trap operation attracts a group of demons? Agatha couldn't help but laugh. Seeing how confident you were before, I thought you had never worried about this problem. Ahem, I just want to make sure that nothing goes wrong. She said lightly, just bring me and Miss Anna. Anna? You may not have a correct understanding of the witches in your territory, Your Majesty. Agatha sighed. You must know that the Union, whose power covers the entire fertile plains, only has more than 100 senior witches. Among them, there are less than 40 who have combat abilities. They constitute the top management of the Union and the backbone of the Blessed Army. In your witch union, there are several senior witches. Coupled with those strange weapons, your strength is comparable to that of a blessed army. It won't be difficult for you to defeat a group of demons. Even if you encounter the Lord of Hell, Miss Anna can activate the sigil of God's will twice. I almost forgot about that thing. Roland suddenly realized. Thank you for your suggestion. You're welcome. Defeating demons is my lifelong wish. Don't let me down, Your Majesty. When Agatha was about to leave, Roland stopped her again. By the way, I still have something I don't understand. What is it? Why did you have such a big reaction to the attack on Devil's Town? Roland raised his eyebrows. You didn't say that before. I remember that at the beginning, you not only wanted to take the initiative to attack them, but also wanted to seize the possible chaos beasts in the camp at all costs, didn't you? Agatha suddenly felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't need to look to know that it must be a red blush. She couldn't say that at that time. She felt that Roland couldn't stop the demons at all and was bragging about his strength. That was why she said those words out of spite. Now that she felt that the situation in the territory was good and that as time passed, the strength of the human beings would become stronger and stronger, her attitude naturally became different. did I? I don't remember saying that. But at that time, you really, Your Majesty, I feel very sleepy. She forced a yawn. Please allow me to leave first. Then she left the office without looking back. As she walked through the corridor leading to the witch building, the cool night breeze blew on Agatha's face and gradually calmed her down. Looking at the sky full of stars, Vendi's words suddenly came to her mind. One day, he will become the king of Grey Castle and lead us to defeat any enemy. That's what I believe. At that time, seeing the look of conviction on her face, Agatha felt both envious and a little sad. She envied that they were not overwhelmed by the cruel reality, and she was sad that trust could not make up for the difference in strength. But now, she also believed it a little. Ify did not remember how she returned to her bedroom. Her mind was filled with the scene of guns and cannons. Hundreds of people lined up neatly and pulled the trigger at the target in front of them. She could not see anything except the thick white smoke. Even if she could perceive it with her magic power, she would not be able to trap the bullets in time. His Majesty did not lie. The power of the metal bullets was far more powerful than the special bullets Maggie had used in the duel with her. The wooden target that was 100 steps away was riddled with holes, and the witches could only be beaten passively at this distance. As for the other weapon called the artillery, it was even more terrifying. Its attack range was several times that of the guns, and they even needed to use a telescope to observe the results of the shooting. However, the leading guard said that it was just the oldest field artillery, and that a weapon called the 152mm long-song cannon was the real trump card of the artillery battalion. All kinds of explosions kept ringing in her mind, and finally, all of them converged into one thought. Heidi Morgan lied to us. Ify murmured. Or maybe she didn't expect that there was such a power in the world. Soft Feathers had a complicated look on her face. Apparently, she was also shocked by the military training in the afternoon. What should we do next? Ify did not answer. No matter what purpose Heidi had, it was meaningless now because she knew that the Bloodfang Association could not afford what His Majesty wanted. The many assistant witches under Tilly Wimbledon were obviously much more useful than the combat witches of the Bloodfang Association. Recalling the experience of the past few years, Ify found that the ability and growth that she was so proud of had become a joke. There was nothing worth remembering except Annie. After a long time, she raised her head and said, "I don't want to go back to the Bloodfang Association." Soft Feathers nodded imperceptibly. Me too. Then she was stunned. Are you crying? Ify felt a trace of saltiness at the corner of her mouth. She raised her hand to wipe her cheeks, and a wet feeling came from her fingertips. I don't know. She had not tasted tears for a long time. Beasts never cried. Even if they did, they would not cry for her. If only she and Annie had met the witch union from the very beginning. Ify closed her eyes and let the salty rain fall on her heart. Chapter 543. 2 days later, Roland met Ify in his office again. Her complexion was a little better than before, and there seemed to be more complicated emotions in her eyes. She looked more lively than before, and she seemed more like a person. Heidi Morgan wants to see you, but it's not convenient for her to come by herself, so she asked Tilly Wimbledon to take us with her. Her opening remarks after saluting surprised Roland a little. Lady Heidi doesn't like Her Highness Tilly. She thinks that combat witches are the core of Sleeping Island, and the Bloodfang Association shouldn't be treated as an ordinary witch organization. Therefore, she hopes to open up the situation with you, and promise that she can give more than what Tilly can give. Of course. I know you don't need these things. Tell me in detail about the Bloodfang Association. Roland supported his chin and said, Yes. The story lasted for an hour, and he frowned more and more. At the end of the story, he could not help but ask, Does Tilly know about these things? I don't know. Ify shook her head. Lady Heidi forbade us to reveal the past of the Bloodfang Association, and she rarely talked to Her Highness. What about the other witch organizations that joined Sleeping Island? They were closer to the witches of Grey Castle, especially after the establishment of Sleeping Spell. Although some combat witches secretly agreed with Lady Heidi, most of them were unwilling to confront Ashes. It turned out that the pressure on Tilly's shoulders was no less than his own. Roland secretly sighed in his heart. Unlike him, who was the legitimate ruler of the Western region, the witches of Sleeping Island were more like a loose alliance organization. Although Tilly was the convener, she had no authority over the small groups that came to seek refuge. It was also because of this that one could see her outstanding ability, uniting most of the assistant witches and actively establishing connections with the secular rulers of other islands. In particular, the establishment of the sleeping spell gave her an opportunity to manage all the witches. After all, auxiliary witches are equally important, was not just empty talk. The Witches' Bounty Guild just happened to give those auxiliary witches with strange abilities an excellent stage to display their abilities. When they completed tasks and received a large sum of money, and the money was used to improve the quality of life on Sleeping Island, this kind of mindset would gradually form. After all, no matter how powerful a combat witch was, she did not want to live by eating salted fish all day long. When the assistant witch's status was promoted, they would naturally be more inclined towards Tilly. At that time, as the master of the guild, Tilly would undoubtedly have a greater say. This was probably the reason why Heidi Morgan couldn't wait any longer. In addition, the Bloodfang Association itself was also full of doubts. As the daughter of Grand Duke Morgan, how could Heidi not be able to support a group of non-combat witches? It could only be said that from the very beginning, she had never intended to take in those useless people. Her purpose was different from the Witch Cooperation Association. She only wanted a team that could fight for her. Coupled with her obsession with the kingdom of Wolfshart, Roland became even more vigilant. Perhaps it was necessary to write a secret letter to Tilly so that she could be careful of the Bloodfang Association. Didn't Heidi forbid you from revealing the inside story of the Bloodfang Association? Roland gently knocked on the table and asked, "Are you not going to listen to her anymore?" Iffy bit her lip and said, "I want to join the Witch Union." The knocking suddenly stopped. Roland looked at her a few times in surprise. Although he knew that the demonstration of the force of the hot weapons would give these combat witches who were proud of their powerful abilities a serious blow, he did not expect the effect to be so obvious. "But you hurt Maggie." He thought for a moment and said, "I can't. About this, please punish me." Iffy unbuttoned her robe. Almost at the same time, a pair of hands covered Roland's eyes from behind. However, Nightingale seemed to have forgotten that she was in the state of mist, and her transparent fingers could not block him. She opened her lapel, took off her robe, and turned her back to Roland. Roland could not help but gasp. Iffy's back was covered with all kinds of whip marks. The recovered wounds looked like countless earthworms crisscrossing on her back, which formed a sharp contrast with the delicate skin around it. Probably because the wounds had long healed, Nana's healing ability did not take effect on them, so they remained intact. When Iffy talked about the harsh combat training of the Bloodfang Association, she only used one sentence to cover it up. However, now that he thought about it, Roland could vaguely smell the smell of blood contained in those words. "Put your clothes back on," he said in a low voice. "But Your Majesty." Nightingale had already shown herself. She walked forward and pulled her robe back to its original position. "If you want to join the Witch Union, don't use the Bloodfang Association's methods." Roland suddenly felt a little depressed. "You can apply to Vendi. As for whether the others are willing to accept you, it depends on your performance." He paused. "But no matter what, Neverwinter is the home of witches. You can live here for a long time even if you don't join the union." Hearing the last sentence, Iffy's shoulders visibly loosened. "Thank you for your kindness." After watching Iffy leave, Roland got up and walked to the French window. He let out a long sigh. In this way, the team to capture the demons was complete. However, he did not feel much relaxed at this moment. "Actually, that girl is lucky enough." Nightingale walked to him and said, "Is that really lucky? Compared to her partner Annie, at least she survived. If the Bloodfang Association is really the only witch organization left in the kingdom of Wolfheart, being caught by the church or the nobles will only lead to a more tragic end. That's why the sisters yearn for the holy mountain so much. A doubt suddenly emerged in Roland's mind. Did Heidi Morgan really send those non-combat witches to other witch organizations? In order to avoid exposing their whereabouts, the witches usually keep in touch with each other and change their gathering places frequently. How did Heidi get all this information? After all, the stronghold was a matter of life and death. Leaders would not easily tell others about the organization's activity location unless they trusted someone very much. And even if she knew all this, sending witches to other witch organizations would be very easy to expose. Would other witch organizations accept witches sent by her generously? The more Roland thought about it, the more he found it strange. However, Nightingale had confirmed that Iffy was not lying. So the problem was obviously with the founder of the Bloodfang Association. In this way, Heidi's danger level had increased. Roland realized that he should tell this news to Tilly as soon as possible so that she could investigate and make early preparations. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.